Can I welcome members, officers and the public here in the gallery and watching on the webcast. The London Assembly is the voice of London, composed of 25 members elected at the same time as the Mayor in order to hold him to account and scrutinise his policies. This is Mayor's question time, meeting of the Assembly, which means that all members are invited to attend and ask questions of the Mayor. In a case of emergency and any need to exit the building, guests seated in the public gallery should follow the security staff and Assembly members should follow the meeting clerk. Members are also reminded that any electronic devices should not be placed in front of microphones. Can I ask the clerk, Rebecca Arnold, to confirm any apologies for absence?
Thank you, Chair. We have apologies from Assembly Member Moama.
Great, thank you. Before we begin, I would like to welcome the business and public relations students from the Immerse Education that we have with us here today in the chamber. Okay. We will also be joined by A-level students from my constituency later in the meeting. I will now move to an update of activities since our last full Assembly meeting on the 23rd of June. The Budget and Performance Committee scrutinised the financial performance of the GLA Group, concentrating on transport, policing and the core GLA. The Economy Committee had a roundtable with a number of small arts and cultural organisations to discuss their livelihoods and the future success of the sector. The Environment Committee discussed the Mayor's efforts to improve the energy efficiency of London's homes and energy generation initiatives. The Fire Resilience and Emergency Planning Committee met to discuss the draft Community Risk Management Plan, the London Fire Brigade strategy from 2023 to 2029. The GLA Oversight wrote to the Mayor, highlighting concerns about the process of relocating here to the new City Hall and looked at opportunities for further devolution in London, in particular fiscal devolution relating to business rates, council tax and land value. The Health Committee looked at the impact of the pandemic on maternal health services. The Housing Committee discussed the challenges that women face in accessing safe and affordable housing in London, including specific groups of women who face disproportionate challenges. The Planning and Regeneration Committee discussed what extent the housing standards to set out in London Plan guidance to fit for purpose for all Londoners now and in the future. The Police and Crime Committee spoke to the Metropolitan Police about Her Majesty's Inspectorate decision to place the Metropolitan Police into a form of special measures, as well as conducting the second part of an investigation into London's probation services and the management of offenders. The Transport Committee held a question-and-answer session with London Travel Watch, a former bus driver and other passenger groups to better understand their needs as part of a well-functioning bus system. More recently, they also met to discuss TfL's proposal to expand the ULEZ to cover most of the Greater London, changes to the Mayor's transport strategy, and initial ideas on road user charging. And finally, Deputy Chair Andrew Boff spoke of at the Mayor's pride reception, and I laid a wreath on behalf of the Assembly at the Hyde Park 7/7 Memorial. Can I ask the Assembly to note the interests set out in item number 2? Okay. Do Assembly members have any other disclosable pecuniary interests which relate to the items on the agenda for today's meeting, or any other relevant interests, including any declarations in relation to gifts and hospitality which are not reflected on the authority's Register of Gifts and Hospitality? Thank you. Can I ask the Assembly to confirm the minutes of the London Assembly plenary meeting held on the 9th of June 2022 and the Mayor's question time meeting held on the 23rd of June 2022 for me to sign as correct records? Okay. Can I ask the Assembly to formally receive the Mayor's report covering the period 10th of June 2022 to 7th of July 2022? The Mayor will now provide an oral update for up to 5 minutes in the length on matters occurring since the publication of his report. Mr. Mayor, over to you.
Good morning, Chair. Good morning, everyone. It's great to see you all again. I hope you've been keeping well and staying safe in this challenging weather. In fact, I want to start today by paying tribute to everyone at the London Fire Brigade for their incredible efforts over the last week. Tuesday was the busiest day for the LFB since the Second World War, with more than a dozen large fires burning across our city at the same time. Were it not for the bravery of our firefighters and the professionalism of our emergency call handlers, there's no doubt in my mind that the situation we faced would have been far worse. My thoughts are with all those Londoners affected, especially those who've lost homes and businesses, as well as the 16 firefighters who were injured and the 2 who had to be taken to hospital. I'm sure all members of the Assembly will join me in wishing them a fast and full recovery. It goes without saying this has been a difficult week for our city, but once again we've seen the very best of London, not only in the courage of our firefighters, but also in the selfless actions of Londoners who chose to prioritise alerting their neighbours to the danger over saving their own personal belongings. It's at times like these we're reminded just how strong our communities are and how special our city is. The heat wave that London, the UK and much of Western Europe has been experiencing is evidently deeply alarming. These temperatures are not only dangerous but deadly. Almost 2,000 heat-related deaths have already been reported in Spain and Portugal, and the death toll for the whole of Europe will only rise further once all the data has been collected. On Monday and Tuesday, London was one of the hottest places in the world, hotter than even the Western Sahara or the Caribbean. Clearly, this is not normal. But it's worth pointing out that what we're seeing is entirely consistent with the predictions of climate scientists who've long warned us to expect more frequent and more intense extreme weather events as a result of man-made global warming. The scenes of recent days also show that no country or city is immune to the consequences of the climate emergency. This isn't something we can simply wall ourselves off from or wish away. The climate crisis is real and it's already affecting everyone, everywhere. That's why the extreme weather of the last week must serve as a wake-up call to national governments. As Mayor, I've been amplifying the public health advice over the last week and encouraging Londoners to make reasonable adjustments to protect themselves from the heat, while at the same time continue to take bold and ambitious action to tackle the twin threat posed by the climate emergency and toxic air pollution. It is essential now that we see the same level of urgency and action from central government. Let me end by mentioning the amazing skill, stamina and spirit demonstrated by the Women's England team last night. I know I speak for many Londoners when I say that we're behind the Lionesses all the way, although, Chair, I've got to tell you, being 1-0 down with a few minutes to go, I was a bit worried. And by the way, what a screamer from Stanway to win the game. I'm thrilled that along with the organisers of the tournament, City Hall will host the country's largest outdoor screening on Trafalgar Square for Tuesday's historic semi-final match with England. The best thing is it's free and there are 5,000 tickets available. Londoners and visitors just need to register interest on the london.gov.uk website. Other matters I would have dealt with in my opening statement are covered in some of the questions I'll be answering today, so I'll stop now, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for that update. I think that Assemblymember Prince wants to come in a matter specifically related to your statement.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mayor. Can I echo your words in relation to the praise of our blue light services? I did actually write to the fire chief asking about a water bowser for Wennington. And as you know, Wennington actually nearly got involved with the fire. Certainly they were involved in relation to the staff, but the actual fire encroached onto their land. Would you, Mr. Mayor, just ask again if they would reconsider the provision of a water bowser for Wennington, please?
I'm more than happy to, impinged homes which abut the fire station. So literally, the fire station was directly affected. Of course, I'm more than happy to go away and I'm seeing the Commissioner later on today. I'll mention it to him orally, but I'll drop him a note as well, so it's in writing.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. We now move to the questions on the priority order paper. Each group is allocated an amount of time to ask the questions that is proportionate to their size. The first question is number 2344, cost of living sport hub, the cost of living sport hub in the name of Assembly Member Bukhari.
Thank you. Thanks for the question. In April, I launched the Cost of Living Hub to help Londoners struggle with the spiralling cost of living to access advice and support. The hub helps Londoners find advice near them and signposts information about benefits, energy, debt, mental health and crisis support. It was developed and built in-house by GLA officers at no additional cost. Between £100,000 and £150,000 has been allocated for work to improve the usability and accessibility of the hub and to raise awareness of the hub within communities most affected by the cost of living crisis. As part of this work, officers have carried out user testing to better understand how Londoners in financial hardship navigate and interact with the hub. Improvements are being made to its design and content based on the recommendations from the user testing in time for the hub's relaunch in September. Over 40 London-based community organisations, networks and anti-poverty charities have also given their feedback. Officers have commissioned a benefits calculator that will feature on the hub so that Londoners can check their entitlement to welfare support without having to leave the site. The team is also working with partners to develop translations of the hub's content into 10 languages for Londoners with limited English, including an easy-read version. The hub and the support it offers will be promoted to Londoners through an online and in-person campaign funded through existing resource. This will include leaflets to share key messages to communities who are less likely to access the content online. To increase our reach, we've launched an open call for grant funding for the development of new or existing digital tools that will be hosted by third-party sites and signposted to from the hub. Officers are monitoring the success of the Cost of Living Hub by tracking the number of unique page views the hub receives and will report on progress quarterly. The hub is a useful tool for Londoners who might be struggling, but the levers to tackle the cost of living all sit with central government. As a start, Londoners desperately need the government to freeze private rents for the next 2 years, abolish the benefit cap, 2-child limit and no recourse to public funds conditions, and expand eligibility for free school meals to all primary age school children.
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor. In June, the London Assembly passed a cost of living emergency motion to highlight the need of support for our most vulnerable Londoners and to make sure it's most effective. Now, when I spoke to the Trussell Trust, which I know is part of the groups that you've been consulting this week, they welcomed the cost of living hub, but they did urge that we must go further to end the postcode lottery in the provision of local support across London. Now, you've also mentioned that you are going to be doing some reviewing. Will that particular area be reviewed when you do this review to make sure that you're helping the most vulnerable? And are unique page views to evaluate the success of the cost of living support hub enough?
Well, let me be frank, a cost of living hub is not going to alleviate the struggles families are facing across our city. I mentioned in my answer some of the changes required from central government. The postcode lottery is partly caused by some councils, frankly speaking, being better than others. Some councils having more deprived communities, so have bigger challenges. But also some of the community services available, in addition to services from the council, are better in some parts of London than others for a variety of historical reasons. I accept, just simply checking the numbers of people going to a page won't be able to, for us to assess the success or otherwise. There are a number of other things we're doing, as I said in my answer. I'm more than happy to write to the member in relation to some of the additional things we're doing, but always keen to hear from members with their own experiences from the communities they speak to and some of the things we can be doing with the limited resources we have to help the families that I know she cares about.
I look forward to that written answer. Around 270,000 Londoners are considered to actually be digitally excluded and are actually unable to access your cost of living support hub. And they're the people that we really need to help. So what additional work are we doing to reach out to those digitally excluded Londoners who need advice and support during this cost of living emergency?
Well, I'm sure the members well aware of the work of the London Recovery Board. One of the things that we know was a case during the pandemic was the digital inequality in relation to children who couldn't access classroom lessons because they were relying upon mum or dad's mobile phone because there were no laptops at home. Lack of connectivity in some parts of London in relation to Wi-Fi connection and so forth, and also lack of skills their parents or carers had in relation to the inability to help their children. So the 3 areas of focus in relation to the work of the London Recovery Board across London is addressing the issue of skills shortages, so parents and carers have the skills to work with their children and themselves, particularly older people, accessing skills. Secondly is helping people have the right kit, including free laptops, tablets and so forth to some members of our communities. And thirdly is improving connectivity across our city. You'll be aware in some parts of London the digital connection is really awful, other parts is great. And so all three things are being addressed by the work of the Recovery Board. It's one of the 9 missions that we have.
Energy and food prices, though, are going to continue to rise, causing more stress, anxiety to many Londoners, and that includes innocent leaseholders. And they're trapped in buildings blighted by fire safety defects, and they're facing crippling bills, and it's only going to get worse. Leaseholders are, and have been for a while now, crying out for a support hub to help them, especially now because of this emergency. Will you reconsider establishing the fully costed building support hub that we proposed to provide leaseholders with the necessary support that they desperately need right now?
Well, I don't accept that was a fully costed leaseholders hub. There is a hub for leaseholders provided by the government. It costs £1.2 million. That's fully costed because they spend that, and they spend a similar amount every year. The inverted commas fully costed hub put forward by the member was £120,000, clearly not commensurate with the challenge leaseholders face in London, or the cost of a hub for leaseholders. Many of the issues facing leaseholders, and I meet them regularly, can't be met by a hub. They're in relation to some of the changes that need to be made. I'm concerned that Michael Gove's resigned.
So that's a no to the hub for the leaseholders, is that? Just to be clear.
I'm concerned that Michael Gove, who's doing a really good job helping leaseholders, is no longer in his job. The key thing is to make sure whoever succeeds him, once there's a new Prime Minister, he or she understands the challenges facing leaseholders, which the government's lease hub, which costs £1.2 million, is not addressing because it needs more than a hub.
Okay, let's leave it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. The next question, Mr. Mayor, is 2541. It's the name of Member Russell, and it's reducing road death and injury through policing.
Thank you. Thanks for your question. Since we introduced Vision Zero in 2018, casualties in London have fallen faster than the national average as we work towards my zero target for 2041. I'm pleased with the progress we've made in London, but our journey to Vision Zero is far from complete. The impact of road deaths and serious injuries on families is devastating, and too many communities are blighted by road danger. Last year, the number of people killed on London's roads was the lowest on record, but still 75 people sadly died on London's roads last year, and over 3,500 were seriously injured. That's far too many. Transport for London and the Met Police Service have a strong and successful partnership in keeping Londoners safe, especially through the collaboration with the Roads and Transport Policing Command, RTPC, which leads on Vision Zero, and roads policing for the MPS and the Met Prosecutions team for safety camera enforcement. The MPS prioritises as enforcement on the offences that cause the greatest risk and harm on London's roads, including speeding. Although the MPS already undertakes more speed enforcement than any other force in the country, we need to go further to challenge the culture around speeding in London, because speeding is a factor in half of all fatal collisions. TfL and the MPS are working to significantly increase levels of speed enforcement across London, building the capacity to enforce up to 1 million offences by 24-25 through a combination of on-street police enforcement and safety cameras, including the introduction of 5 new mobile safety cameras earlier this year. Significant progress has already been made, with the MPS dealing with 72% more speeding offences in 2021-2022 than the previous year. The RTPC also undertakes important community engagement on speed through roadwatch initiatives, where local residents have the opportunity to work side by side with police teams using speed detection equipment to identify speeding vehicles. This work is critical to achieving Vision Zero and my wider vision of a cleaner, safer and more sustainable London. As TfL currently funds around 65% of the total cost of the RTPC, it's vital, though, that TfL receives long-term funding certainty so it can maintain its investment in dedicated policing for London's roads and public transport networks.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and I would thoroughly agree with you about the need for sustainable funding from the government for Transport for London. This is really urgent work that needs to be paid for. It's more than 10 years since the Times journalist Mary Bowers was left in a minimally conscious state, facing the rest of her life in a care home after being run over by a tipper lorry twice. That was one of the catalyst moments 10 years ago to trigger the campaigner calls for safer lorries that you've done such welcome work on. Victims who suffer life-changing injuries, like losing a leg, tell me that they feel that their injury doesn't matter much to the police, and they're frustrated that an opportunity to learn and prevent future collisions through a thorough investigation gets lost. Between 2018 and 2020, the Serious Collision Investigation Unit investigated 62% of fatal collisions and just 4% of serious collisions on London's roads. So my question is, if you're going to meet your Vision Zero target, does the Serious Collision Investigation Unit need to be investigating more of the serious collisions, and would you commit to that?
Chair, can I thank the member for asking the question the way she did, and can I take that away? We do, when we give figures, mention not just those killed but also seriously injured for the reasons you suggest, but your follow-up point about investigations is one that I want to look into, because the stats you mentioned are clearly worrying. So can I, Chair, take that away and be in touch with the member offline, or ask my Deputy Mayor to do so?
Thank you. I think there's a huge opportunity to learn from these investigations, so that's appreciated. I look forward to hearing from you. Now, I'm also concerned about road crime like speeding that's often seen by Londoners as being a bit less serious. And it's really good to see the work that the Met is doing on enforcing against speeding offences. I think it was 475,000 enforcements in 2021-22. So my question is, shouldn't the Met be communicating more to Londoners that casually committed road crime, like speeding or close passing, has very serious consequences for the lives of fellow Londoners, and that it will be enforced?
Yeah, we've looked into this. So in the issue of the safety enforcement, most people, when they see the reduced speed limits, 20 miles per hour, do respond to that. I think more than 80% do respond. They're good citizens. A small minority don't, and that's where enforcement is really important. So you're right about public information. I think I'm less concerned about there being not enough of that. I'm more concerned about the lack of, if people think there's no enforcement. And that's one of the reasons why we've invested in the mobile safety cameras, and we work with council to let us know about areas of concern they have. And also, just to reassure you, I know it's no consolation for the victims of an RTA, but post an event, there is also a review done. If there's a particular part of an area where there's lots of incidents in relation to speed, and that's looked into as well. And so I take your point, but I think that issue is more about enforcement.
They've only ever tweeted twice about Vision Zero, and that was 3 years ago. But
I do admire your confidence in those drivers in responding to a tweet to drive slower.
Indeed. More importantly, and this is my final question, at the policing plenary back in December, my colleague Sian Berry asked the then Commissioner for a Met dashboard monitoring the Met's commitment to Vision Zero, so we can find up-to-date data on enforcement of speeding and dangerous driving. The Commissioner was happy to look at it, so my brief final question, where's the Met's road policing dashboard that we're waiting for?
Okay, I'm not on top of that information. Can I, again, Chair, with your permission, write back to the member and let her know what progress has been made in relation to the dashboard she mentions?
That would be much appreciated. Thank you. I have no further questions.
Thank you for those responses, Mr. Mayor. The next question is the name of Assemblymember Best. It's number 2662, and it's called The Biggest Regret.
Thank you, Chair. Being Mayor of London is the greatest job in the world, and I'm proud of my achievements during my time in office so far. We've started almost 13,000 new City Hall funded council homes in London since 2018 and exceeded our affordable homes target yet again last year. We've reduced violence, with violent crime down since before the pandemic and since I became Mayor. We've reduced toxic care in central London by nearly half, and we're going further to replicate this across more of the city. We've helped 200,000 people access free skills training last year alone, and we've put £44 million into my Academies programme to help Londoners into good jobs. And this year we're investing £80 million to help Londoners with the cost of living. But there is one major area where we're struggling in London, and that's transport funding. I regret not being able to convince the government that investing in public transport, rather than insisting on politically motivated cuts, is the right thing for London and our country. At the heart of many of the issues we're currently facing, including the widespread industrial action, is the government's woeful approach to transport across the country. We saw this again last week when we were given another sticking plaster extension to the TfL funding deal. Prior to the pandemic, London was the third most visited city on the planet, with a thriving tourism sector accounting for as many as 1 in 5 jobs. Our Let's Do London campaign is seeking to bring back tourists to our city. But without a properly funded transport network to help these people get around, London will be a much less attractive place to visit. London makes a net contribution of £36 billion a year to the Treasury, money that is spent elsewhere in the country. This contribution to the UK economy depends on a transport network that works for Londoners, visitors and businesses. And we're asking for a fraction of that contribution to keep London's transport running, to support London's recovery and the UK economy. We've made this case again and again to ministers, but Grant Shapps will still not meet with me despite saying he wants to reset our relationship. Without a long-term deal, TfL will be forced into a managed decline scenario. That would mean much more significant cuts to the bus network, tube cuts equivalent to the loss of an entire line, future improvement plans scrapped and the current network fallen into disrepair.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. You've been in charge of TfL for 6 years now. Before lockdown, TfL had a record high debt of £13 billion and 22 out of 26 major capital projects have been delayed or cancelled. You regularly omit that you've had a very generous business rates devolution agreement of £1.9 billion to fund capital projects. And just this year, we've seen that you have underspent on TfL capital funding by 8 times the amount of last time, underspending £400 million. Most look at this situation and just want a resolution and want everyone at the table to act like grown-ups. Do you think that the narrative that you have very little to regret is helpful, and do you think that some humility would perhaps help in getting people back round the table and getting London moving?
Well, let's do with the issue of debt. So Ken Livingstone borrowed £2 billion, Boris Johnson £8 billion, and I've had to borrow £2 billion since I've become mayor. The deficit I inherited when I became mayor has been reduced by more than 71% before the pandemic. The cash reserves I inherited before I became mayor have been built up by more than 13%. We've managed to reduce year-on-year operating costs of TfL since 2016, something never achieved from 2000 to 2016, so it's £1 billion less than in 2016. At the same time, before the pandemic, we cut costs of transport for Londoners by freezing fares for 5 years and introduced a hopper fare. The previous mayor couldn't bring in the night tube. We did it within 5 months of me becoming mayor, with the night overground as well. The only reason for TfL's challenges is because of the pandemic. We were asked to keep it running because key workers needed to get around, but we reduced almost all of our fares revenue. And because of the deal made between Boris Johnson and George Osborne, we now receive no revenue support from the government. That's why TfL has challenges. I'm not humble enough to say it's the government's fault.
Mr. Mayor, I have 4 Assembly members who want to come in supplementaries to that question. And the first Assembly Member Hall.
Thank you. We're talking about regretting things, Mr. Mayor, and you've been in charge, as you know, for 6 years. So do you regret that the Met has been placed under special measures for the first time in its history?
I think all Londoners will regret our police service being put into special measures. I make this point, unlike the Police and Crime Committee, or the Home Secretary, or the Police Minister, or the Home Affairs Select Committee, I was, both publicly and privately, expressing my concerns about the Met Police Service and the former Commissioner. So it gives me no comfort when the HMI agrees with many of the things I've been saying. It gives me no comfort when the HMI refers to the cumulative impact of some of the high-profile incidents that I've been quite vocal on. And it gives me no comfort from when I talked about in 2016 the consequences of austerity, with police officers being cut, us losing £1 billion, HMI confirming that one of the consequences of that is experienced police officers who we lost because of government cuts being replaced recently by inexperienced newer officers, and there not being the sufficient supervision. It's no source of comfort to me being proved right.
Well, the one thing you're exceptionally good at is using up an extreme amount of our time, blaming anybody and everybody other than yourself. You are the Police and Crime Commissioner for London. You have been in charge for 6 years, and for the first time, the Met has been put under special measures. Now, you've got an office called MOPAC, for anybody watching. It's the Mayor's Office for Policing and Crime, and one of the things that they're responsible for, and of course it sits under you and your Deputy Mayor, is ensuring oversight of the police. There are 180 people in that particular organisation that you're in charge of. Do you not think that, given the situation is so bad, that it should have been picked up long before?
Well, 1 out of 7 police forces in the country, 1 out of 7.
No, let's
are
talk
in
about
special-
you. Let's talk about you for a change, and your responsibility and our responsibility to London.
So 1 out of 7 police forces across the country are in special measures, and the Met is one of those. The Mayor's Office for Policing and Crime does a number of things. One is checks and balances on the police service. One is commissioning services. We're now commissioning record amounts of services, which has led to a massive reduction in youth violence, gun crime, burglary and so forth. And the third is provide services. And you've seen some of the services we've provided.
Mr Mayor, do you take any responsibility ever for anything? But on this particular occasion, I'm asking you about the Met. Are you not mortified it's under special measures under you when you have been in charge for 6 years?
And the third thing MOPAC does is the
Yeah,
issue
you see,
of
just
services.
ignore these questions, don't you?
Can you please let the Mayor answer, please?
Well, if he did answer
He will
properly,
answer.
Chairman, I would.
Give him a
Instead
chance.
of that, he goes
Hang
on
on.
and on about a load of old rubbish and won't
Assembly
accept
Hall.
responsibility
Hang on,
for
Assembly.
anything.
Look, can I please make one point? When you ask the Mayor the question, I'm going to allow the Mayor to answer it.
Okay, will you
And
ask
can
the
you
Mayor
please-
to answer it
and
properly
Can you please
then?
not talk over me, please?
Can you ask him to answer properly?
Can you not talk over me,
Do
Ms.
you
Hemphill?
take responsibility, Mr Mayor, since it's under you, since you've been in charge for 6 years? Will you take any of the responsibility for the mess the Metropolitan Police is in?
And
Yes or no?
And now Assembly Hall,
Yes
let
or no?
the Mayor answer
Yes, all right, yes
the way
or no?
he wants to answer it.
Well, I remember the Police and Crime Committee and the member herself, along with the chair of the Met Police Federation, being critical of me when I was holding the Met to account earlier on this year. Being critical of me in previous years when I expressed my concern about some of the things the Met Police has been doing. I don't apologise from both supporting the police service but also challenging them and holding them to account as well. It was because of my concerns in relation to police in London, the racism, the sexism, the misogyny, the homophobia, the discrimination, that I don't have confidence in the former Met Police Commissioner, criticised, by the way, from the member who now expresses mock outrage about the HMI
No, believe
report.
me, this is real outrage, and the Metropolitan Federation and I express extreme disappointment in you, Mr Mayor, and all of us must be disappointed that you aren't even humble enough to say, yes, I actually take some responsibility, something I doubt that will ever come out of your mouth. Thank you, Chairman, I've finished.
Was there a question there, Assembly Hall?
No, that was mock outrage.
I gave up because none of them were being answered properly. All the man has to say is, yes, he deeply regrets it and he takes responsibility, but clearly unable to do that.
Well, Mr Mayor, do you want to... I couldn't hear a question there, but I just want to remind the Assembly members, this is question time, not statement time, please. If you want to make statements, there are other places, but here I want questions asked, which the Mayor can answer. Pardon? Yes. No, I don't think so. We can do that, yes. So next member who's indicated to me they want to speak is Assemblymember Bailey.
Morning, Mr Mayor, and thank you for your answer. But in your answer, I didn't hear you mention the plight of the black community. You've been mayor for 6 years now, and in that time, 355 members of the black community have been murdered. In fact, we are 4 times more likely to be murdered than our neighbours. Surely you regret that on your watch.
Well, I've been expressing for some time, Chair, my concern about the experiences of victims of crime, and disproportionately, they're black Londoners, they're poor Londoners, they're those Londoners who live in deprived communities. Without excusing crime, they're those Londoners who live in areas of high inequality and poor housing. In fact, I'm the person who's been talking about dealing with the causes of crime, and that includes structural inequalities and structural racism. It's my Conservative opponents who criticise those of us who talk about this deprivation and who explain that austerity was a choice. In 2010, the coalition government made a choice to choose austerity. And those cuts in public services, those cuts in youth centres, those cuts in policing, those cuts in decent housing, the increase in inequality have been one of the factors why there's been an increase in violent crime across our country, including London. Look at some of the consequences of our investment in young black Londoners and poor Londoners. We're now seeing for the first time since 2016 a reduction in youth violence, a reduction in knife crime injury, a reduction in knife crime injury with a knife, a reduction in gun crime. That means more black Londoners being safer because of our policies made much harder with cuts from central government. And what I'd say gently to the member, if he is concerned about the issue of poorer Londoners and black Londoners, to lobby the next leader of the Conservative Party, the next Prime Minister, to reverse austerity rather than continuing with Johnson's policies.
Yeah, but I think you're deflecting slightly, because when it comes to crime in London, and particularly the financial provision of that, the VRU gets money for crime prevention. You've had grants from the government for particular initiatives. You have access to business rates money, and of course you raise the council precept, to which you're part of the council precept, that you then spent the money on crime, and we supported all that. So I'm
no,
asking,
you didn't. You voted against the budget.
Yeah, no. So I'm asking
every
you,
budget you voted
so
against.
I'm asking
every
you,
budget.
I'm asking you, what have you done? For instance, did you spend enough time speaking to the right people about crime? Did you speak to the victims of crime early on? Did you get involved in that early enough to do the right thing for the community?
Let me do with all the points raised. There were 5 points raised there, Chair, to be fair. So firstly, I'm the first mayor in the history of the mayoralty to regularly spend time speaking to bereaved families and victims of crime, as I did when I was a Member of Parliament. It's really important to do so, not just because they deserve that respect, spend time with the Member of Parliament or Mayor, but also you can learn from their experiences. In 5 years, forget 6 years, in 5 years I've invested more in policing than any mayor in history, and that's during an 8-year term. Livingston had 8 years, Johnson had 8 years as well. I've invested more in policing than any other mayor in history. I've also invested more in youth services than any other mayor in history, not from money from central government, from a combination of business rates and council tax precept, by the way. What this government has done in the last 12 years is take £1 billion out of the Met Police budget. At one stage, we had less than 30,000 police officers in London, the fewest we've ever had, bear in mind the size of our population, and our population has been going up. In the last 2 years, the government's agreed to partially reverse these cuts, partially. So we lost 21,000 officers across the country. We've partially replaced them with 20,000, but only 4,500 in London at a time when the population is rising. So it's 1 million population more than 2010, and we had less police officers. And the only reason we're getting more police officers is because of the 1,300 we invested from City Hall and a consequence of our lobbying from central government. It's still not enough, though, because according to the former commissioner, we needed 6,000 from the 20,000. We've only got 4,500. So we still have too few police officers as a consequence of government cuts. We still have too few youth services as a consequence of austerity, and our councils are struggling because they've lost more than half of their budget since 2010. Notwithstanding that, we're investing in young people, we're investing in the police, and we're continuing to make progress.
Thank you for your answer. Of course, I'm focused on what you could do. You made the comment there that you see families that are bereaved. But how early did you do this? You were famously shamed into admitting that you'd seen absolutely no families by Thea Eshelwood on the radio. How many families did you see? When did you start this? How many victims of violent crime, particularly in the black community, had they been before you saw any of the victims of those crimes, those families?
One of the problems with long questions is when there are misconceptions and lies, it's difficult to address them because there are 4 or 5 points. I went to my first funeral as mayor within a month of being mayor, and he was a black Londoner within the first month of being mayor.
Yeah, you went to the funeral, but did you speak to anybody from the communities, the victims? You were asked a direct question on the radio, how many families had you seen as victims of knife crime, and you had to say none. So I'm asking you, how many people were murdered before you bothered to speak to people from the community?
So I live in the community, and I spoke to bereaved families both as a Member of Parliament and within a month of being elected mayor as the mayor. I'm not sure which particular lie he's telling about a radio interview, but I can be quite clear. I regularly meet bereaved families and victims of crime, and it's only one party that uses victims as a political football, and that's the Tory party. There's only one party that's made cuts over 12 years of policing and youth services in in the country, and that's been the Conservative Party. What I'd ask him to do is reflect on his responsibility in supporting 3 Prime Ministers now, Cameron, May and Johnson, who have cut public services, cut youth services, cut policing. That's led to what we're seeing across the country.
Chair.
1 in 7 police services in special measures, and crime across the country going up when it's going down in London.
Mate, look, we know you like to deflect by bringing in people's names, but the bottom line is you are responsible for crime prevention in London. We've had a record amount of murders in the black community under your watch, and you've had the funds to do something about it, but you haven't showed the leadership to do something about it. Back to you, Chair.
Chair, is that a statement or a question? Because I think I'm allowed to respond in Mayor's question time, surely.
Well,
Because
I keep reminding
as-
Assembly members this is Mayor's question time.
As he was making his speech, it took me back to other debates we had before May 2021.
I hope this isn't coming out of my time, Chair.
Well, I'm answering the question.
Did you ask a
Chair.
question, Mr.
No,
Assembly?
I didn't.
Okay, then I think can I remind you to ask questions next time,
Thank you,
please,
Chair.
and stop making statements.
Consider me reminded. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think the Assembly members are reminded that they must ask questions that you can answer rather than make statements. Pardon?
On the Labour side too. Just 'cause
Yes, and the Labour side too, and the Labour side too, and the Liberal Democrats and the Greens. We all ask questions.
I look forward to your impartiality when the Labour members start making statements later.
Look, let me tell you, for people watching the public, look, you are.
I think they've stopped by now, Chair.
Pardon?
I think they've stopped watching by now.
They are on you are on timers. You're using your time up. It's a question about how you use it effectively, and this is Mayor's question time. Okay, I have two other members who want to come in. One is Assembly Member Rogers, and I'll bring you in later on.
Thank you, Chair. Oh, what fun. Mr. Mayor, talking of regrets, do you regret the way that too many Londoners have been let down by your Solar Together London scheme?
Yeah, I do. Can I thank you for raising this offline as well? I've looked at you when you raised it last time, the issue, because you'd received, I think, 2 complaints. I'd had almost 100 people contact me in relation to the issue. It's not on in relation to a number of things. We are looking into this. There is an explanation which I don't want to excuse the poor service that have been received by too many Londoners. The fact that 100 contact me gives you an idea that that's not normal. We're looking into what went wrong. We've met with both the company doing the installations and their partner. We understand what the issues are. No consolation to your constituents and Londoners. I think because of supply issues, we're seeing this across different places of the country where these have been installed. I'm happy to write you to reassure you that we think we've understood the problem. We think we can ameliorate some of the issues. It's not going to be perfect yet until we get more supply. But I want to thank Chair. Offline, the member raised it with me. I looked into it, and there are problems, and we think we know what they are, and we think we've got a way forward. But I can write to you to save you time if you want.
No, thank you. Writing to me would be appreciated. I mean, you're right. There have been hundreds of complaints. The particular one I got involved with, my constituent, ended up involving an assembly member, a deputy mayor, senior GLA officers to get a set of solar panels installed. It really shouldn't come to that. I'm sure you've seen the Trustpilot reviews where Solar Together's 2.6 gets, UK has got 2.3. I was looking at the reviews, and they are pretty damning recently. There's one in particular that said the installation was shambolic. There were missed appointments. He couldn't get the handover pack he needed to complete the process. Promises to call back aren't kept. He says that this experience should be noted by potential customers. This particular review was signed by Sir Peter Hendy, CBE, who I think you know. Yeah. So there's clearly significant issues. And on page 23 of your Solar Together strategy, it says that through a rigorous supplier vetting process, by auditing installations and best practice standards, will benefit from high-quality solar. Do you think this process isn't as rigorous as it could be? And will you be, in addition to sort of the other points you're addressing, will you be addressing the actual supplier processes as well?
So nothing the member has said would I disagree with in relation to the numbers. Just to give you an idea of the scale, there have been 454 complaints on Solar Together Phase 4. It's this particular Phase 4. There's a big increase in a number of solar panels going out, and the volumes experienced was the challenge in relation to promises being made that couldn't be met, people being frustrated by the delay, and so forth. So just to reassure you, the explanation for the delays is the delivery. They've struggled to do so. So some of the stuff we've done in relation to address this is iChooser, who are the partner we instructed, they have a contract with Get UK. For the next phase, they'll have more than one person doing this work. So you're not having all the eggs in one basket. One of the lessons to learn as we go to Phase 5, Phase 4, which is the one person doing the work on the ground, who are Get UK. Again, it's no consolation for your constituents and those who've contacted me. We've been assured that there's now iChooser now have a manager at every Get UK site who meet 1 day a week and hold daily calls to review progress, and to reduce the risk of late cancellations, which is a huge frustration in the correspondence you've sent us. The amount of bookings, rather than promising 70 and not meeting them, 50 a week. That way you're going to meet the time. And separately, the Deputy Mayor, Sheila Rodriguez, is meeting again with iChooser to raise the additional concerns. Our officers have raised them with them because you're right, because people get put off with the best of intentions, and that can't be right. So phase 4 we're trying to sort out. Phase 5 should be better.
Excellent. Well, people do get put off, and it's a shame because, you know, these are people trying to do the right thing and live more sustainably. So if you would write to me, I would be very grateful. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Mr. Mayor, in 6 years, don't you regret that there are homes currently being built on your affordable housing programme that will require retrofitting in the future to comply with your own energy efficiency standards?
I'm not sure what he means. I'm sorry, it's my fault, not his, I'm sure.
I mean, the homes that are currently being built in the past 6 years, the homes that are being built in the past 6 years, many of those will have to be retrofitted for energy standards. Do you regret that? And do you regret that those high standards weren't imposed at the time of design and building?
I'm unclear what retrofitting he means, what needs to be done.
The retrofitting to comply with energy efficiency standards.
They do. I don't, is there a particular issue that he's saying needs to be retrofitted? Because
I've heard, I mean, one of the pieces of data that perhaps could resolve this, perhaps you could further send on to me, is to let me know over the past 6 years how many of those homes that have been built will need retrofitting to comply with the standards that you have established under the London Plan.
So I think we're talking at cross purposes, probably my fault, not yours again. So the funding we have from the government is for starts in relation to affordable housing. On top of that, to get permission, you need to satisfy the planning rules we have. And I've brought in the London Plan, which only got approved in 2021 because it was sat on Robert Jenrick's desk for a year. But all developments must abide by the London Plan. But separately, we've got separate policies around environment strategy, around design and so forth. So is he suggesting that some of the homes that are being built aren't in accordance with our policies? Because they all should be.
I'm suggesting that you've established plans, you've established standards recently. In fact, you're consulting at the moment on standards with your housing design programme, that your own isn't reflected in your own affordable housing programme. So perhaps to cut this short, rather than talking across details, if you could write to me and give me an assurance that every single home that's been built under your affordable housing programme over the past 6 years complies with your current standards for energy efficiency.
Yeah. I mean, if I write to you, it might be easier. If I write to you, it might be easier. Yeah.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to ask Assemblymember Duval to come in, and then I'll bring you in.
Mr. Mayor, I'm quite intrigued of the answer you were about to give in terms of Assemblymember Bailey. You were alluding to something he did in 2021. You were going to tell us and share with us what those were in terms of answers to his question. Can you tell us that? What was you going to say? I
didn't get a chance to answer the speech that he made because you turned a question into a speech, because he already guessed what I was going to say in response to the question. But the 2 points I was going to make was, listening to him speak, there was the first point I was going to say is they were similar to the arguments he was raising in the weeks and months preceding May 2021. Spent a huge amount of money, by the way, in relation to getting this message out across London. One of those who funded this was a guy called Nick Candy. I'm not sure if you know, he was photographed next to the candidate at a party during the worst of the lockdowns. But these arguments were presented to Londoners, and in May 2021, Londoners gave their verdict on his answers. I think no other mayors received more votes than me, which may be because of my opponent and some of the arguments he was making.
And in light of the comments made by the last Conservative member that made a contribution, isn't it around some of the issues around building standards, around the deregulations of Osborne and whoever was in Prime Minister then and other, Cameron, around some of those issues that led to some of the greatest scandals we're in now under building regulations in terms of cladding and insulation and everything else that goes with that?
The 2 points I'd make is in relation to that is firstly, one of the lessons from Grenfell is the consequences of deregulation, cutting, inverted commas, red tape, cutting corners in relation to standards. As it is, we've got the zero carbon requirement in the London Plan. The government's got rid of that for the rest of the country in the interest of deregulation, as you mentioned, and that was Boris Johnson's government. To give the last member credit, he's the one person on the Conservative side who can hold his head up high, because he warned everyone about Boris Johnson. He's been proved right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I want to bring Assemblymember Hall in, please.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, I've been listening to your answers, and you do regret issues around solar together, which of course you can't do anything else but that. But then given that, you expressed no regret over your handling of the situation under the Met, where they've gone into special measures, which for the first time, and it's disgraceful. And even worse than that, you didn't express regret that we've lost so many young black lives. Now, okay, admit regret over the solar, but do you not think that the Metropolitan Police going into special measures is certainly worth something to regret, or certainly to be embarrassed by? I would be. But not to absolutely express remorse at the number of black lives that have been lost in the 6 years that you have been the mayor.
Mr. Mayor?
One of the reasons why I mentioned the funeral in answer to the question from one of the members who asked the questions was because I regret every loss of life in London. I try and attend the funerals when I can, and I meet the families. Every loss of life is one life too many. It's a source of huge regret that those families' lives will never be the same again. I've met parents whose lives have been changed forever, often because a child has been killed. It's because of my anger at the unnecessary loss of life that I've been lobbying the government for more resources in relation to policing. When you cut police officers, don't be surprised if it leads to their inability to deal with crimes that are really important to many Londoners. When you close down youth centres and young people have got nowhere to go to in the evenings and weekends and summer holidays, don't be surprised if idle hands do the devil's work. If you've got young people who've got no aspiration because their communities have seen massive cuts in the ability to provide helping hands, role models, careers advice, after-school clubs and so forth, don't be surprised if some young people get involved in criminality or join criminal gangs and so forth. It's because of my anger at the consequences of austerities, because of my regret at every life lost. I've been a passionate advocate for more resources in young people so they can fulfil their aspirations and potential, but also in relation to giving the police the resources they need
Mr. Mayor, can I just remind you, you have a £20 billion budget. Can I remind you you are the Police and Crime Commissioner? And can I remind you are now up to 34,000 frontline officers, so I wonder what excuse it will be next. No doubt it will be the government's fault, because everything, according to you, is the government's fault.
Chair, we've had 3 speeches. Is that a question or a speech?
Let's turn it into a question, shall we? Well, that's what you'd like me to do, yes, I know. But look, I'm not going to allow any more statements, right? Okay, look, if you can't just get this simply right, this is question time. You put questions. You could have made it a question out of it. But anyway, Mr. Mayor, I think you made your point very well, and the listeners will.
Well, Chair, I should just say for those students watching, that's not how to ask a question.
Make some progress on the published question list. The next question is the name of the Assemblymember Baker. It's number 2369, and it's about a safe transport network.
Thank you, Chair. The safety of Londoners and visitors on our public transport network is a top priority for TfL. The past 2 years have seen some of the most difficult in our history, and I'm deeply grateful to TfL staff, trade unions and TfL supply chain teams who adapted and worked tirelessly to keep the network safe, clean and reliable, despite facing significant financial challenges. TfL has continued its work towards achieving my Vision Zero goal on London's road and public transport network. On TfL-run services, safety is always the #1 priority, and no train or buses would be allowed to run with any outstanding safety concerns. However, TfL also manages a huge range of other safety work, including our Vision Zero road danger reduction programmes, and without long-term and adequate government funding, TfL has to prioritise its activities. TfL has been able to protect £10 million for healthy street schemes to tackle the highest priority safety interventions on the road network. TfL also continues to fund cameras, customer safety campaigns and projects for bus, cycling, walking and driver safety designed to ensure that passengers and staff remain safe. Despite the disruption of the pandemic, TfL has successfully delivered several major projects, including the upgrade at Bank Station, Cycleway 4, the Northern Line extension, walking and cycling improvements at Bishopsgate and Hammersmith Gyratory, enhancing step-free access, and of course, the launch of the Elizabeth Line. All new projects are completed to the highest safety standards. In response to the pandemic, TfL enhanced its cleaning regime across its stations and vehicles, including using new technologies to deliver a transport environment that is cleaner than ever before. However, sustained long-term government funding is vital for the coming years if we're to avoid the managed decline of London's transport network, which would see huge reductions in investment. I'm very concerned about how much the lack of funding will impact our ability as a city to eliminate deaths and serious injuries from our transport network, along with our ability to decarbonise, improve air quality, increase active travel and support a shift towards more sustainable modes.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Thanks for that comprehensive response, and hopefully welcome to the portion of the meeting where we actually ask some more substantive questions. It's really pleasing to hear outline how safety continues to be a priority, but I'd like to ask a couple of specific areas. So having appropriate numbers of staff on hand on tube stations is crucial for personal safety, for the safety of the running of the network, and for passenger confidence, as well as crucially for accessibility for so many Londoners. And how do you think TfL will be able to keep London Underground passengers safe when they're having to look at potentially cutting 500, 600 frontline station staffing posts as a result of government financial demands?
No, thanks for that question. It's a big concern that I had as well when we had to consider this, and I'm particularly mindful of the concern, and Eve raised it, of women not feeling safe, girls not feeling safe, and the assistance often disabled passengers need when they turn up at a station. And it's worth reminding ourselves that we have basically a turn up and go system, unlike a national rail and other public transport. So the proposals that TfL have put forward in relation to the posts being lost are those posts that don't affect any issue around safety. There's got to, and I've had to be reassured that there'll still be staff available at stations at all times to assist for those who need assistance, but also for issues around safety. There's a particular concern, you'll be aware, of having staff at stations where there's deep underground for obvious reasons, and we've made sure that, and that's just the minimum, by the way, we do more than that, and so we're doing more than the minimum. And every post, there's consideration about its impact on safety. The other point I'd make, just to reassure you, as I've been reassured, is on top of the TfL staff, don't forget there are more than 2,500 police and police community support officers, as well as enforcement officers around the estate. And on top of that, separately, there are, of course, the B2B officers as well. So I'm grateful for you raising it. Please continue to raise any particular concerns you've got around particular stations, but I've been reassured that the posts we're talking about, and they're posts, not jobs, by the way, they're not people losing their jobs, shouldn't lead to public transport being any less safe.
Thank you, thank you. I'm sure we will continue to look at it. And finally, just want to move on to a subject that's very close to my heart, which is railway safety. And as part of the government-led cuts under the cover of Great British Rail reforms, Network Rail wants to cut 2,500 safety critical maintenance posts, and those are posts that are, the work is there to make sure the network runs safely. I'm really concerned about the safety of the railway in London, especially as so many Londoners rely on our suburban rail, especially when areas where the tube doesn't go. Do you share that concern? Are you concerned about the future of the railway?
Look, I answer that being fully aware that we're currently being prosecuted because of the tram accident in Croydon, right? Safety issues raised as a consequence of what we've discovered since the accident in Croydon. So Just to reassure you, every time I speak to the Commissioner, the first thing we discuss is safety. This began with the previous Commissioner in relation to safety running through everything we do. And so in the heatwave of the last week, I've learned more about the dangers of rail tracks buckling because of hot temperatures. I now know about the impact on overhead cables and signalling because of the concerns TfL have around the consequence of safety if they don't get this right. And so one of the reasons why TfL reduced the speed of their trains, they didn't need to, because they were concerned about safety if they were going too fast and there was issues with buckling and stuff. So that is at the fore of our mind. Clearly I can't speak for Network Rail. No safety critical job would ever be lost from TfL whilst I'm Mayor, but the current Commissioner and the previous Commissioner, the two have worked very closely. It runs through the DNA of everything they do. And even at TfL board meetings, we encourage non-exec members to raise issues of safety they've experienced or know about during the entire course of the board meeting or at various committee meetings as well. You're right to raise it though, because when I first became elected Mayor, there's a big concern around the staff lost in the previous year because of the station office, the ticket office has been closed down and staff being lost. But we keep an eye on this and we're making sure we do what we can to keep public transport in London run by us as safe as it can be.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. The next question is the name of Assembly Member Ahmed. It's number 2347 and it's about holiday hunger.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for your question. School holidays are often a struggle for low-income families, but the worsening cost of living crisis will leave many more children and their families at risk of going hungry this summer. Last year, around a quarter of children in London schools, over 320,000 children, were eligible for free school meals. Now, with more than 570,000 children in London living in households that receive universal credit, many more children could be facing holiday hunger this summer. The main driver of holiday hunger is families with income levels that are too low to afford the essentials. It's not only children who are affected, adults are having to choose between eating themselves or feeding their children. This is simply unacceptable. We must all take whatever action we can to tackle this crisis so no child or family goes hungry. Despite extreme financial pressures, some London boroughs have committed to using their own resources to fund free school meals over the holidays until the end of the year. I commend them for this, but to really move the dial, we need action from central government. I recently called on the government to act to help families manage the crisis. This included asking for the meal voucher system over the summer holidays for children eligible for free school meals to be restored, for funding for free school meals to increase in line with inflation, and for universal free school meals to be available to all primary school children. For my part, we're spending more than £80 million this year to help Londoners struggle with the rising cost of living, including more than £50 million to tackle fuel poverty, more than £20 million to improve security for private renters and house Londoners who are off sleeping or homeless, more than £5 million to connect Londoners with welfare advice, and £400,000 to tackle food insecurity. These actions can't solve the problem alone, but they will hopefully go some way to easing the pressures so many families are sadly under.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The government's food strategy was released on the 13th of June and was met with disappointment across the board. To draw attention away from that, the then former Education Secretary Nadeem Zahawi, and sorry, that's the one of the former Education Secretaries in those 2 weeks, the next day announced an £18 million increase to universal free school meals. This is an increase of 7 pence per meal to £2.41. Is this enough, given that the current level of food inflation, which now is at 10%, and the removal of the National Free School Meal Voucher Scheme, or will children struggle to get nutritional meals?
So within 2 days, we had 3 separate Secretaries of State for Education. One of them, for 36 hours, she has the distinguished record of being the shortest ever member of the Cabinet, and she received a £17,000 payoff as a severance payment for losing her job for 36 hours work. More than, by the way, a teaching assistant receives in a year for 36 hours worth redundancy payment. And look, the increase, although welcome, doesn't go nowhere near meeting the cost of these meals. So if you look at the funding increase announced by the government, welcome though it is, 7 pence per meal to £2.41, that's not even making up the backlog of the increase in inflation. So £2.41 for a meal now, but if you take into account the inflation there's been in the past, a meal should be costing £2.57. So there's still a gap. And that's one of the reasons why there have been concern expressed about the quality of some of the meals our children are receiving, because obviously if you're spending £2 on a meal, £2.41, query the quality of the meal you can receive. So we are asking the government to consider increasing the contribution towards this will help with the quality of meal received, particularly as for some children, the meal at school is the only decent meal they receive in the daytime because of various issues around poverty, cost of living and so forth.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Mr Mayor, given that the government has stalled until a new Conservative Party leader is elected in early September, what actions are you taking to support food banks this summer?
So it's a big concern we've got in relation to, because the way food banks normally work is people, when they shop, buy extra stuff and leave it in a basket at a shopping centre, they give it to the local food bank. Because families are struggling now, it means there's less surplus food being bought to leave in supermarkets, baskets to give to food banks. So City Hall aren't directly contributing towards food banks. We're working with councils to coordinate and lobby the government in relation to school vouchers, but also supporting councils in other ways through the work of the London Recovery Board, which is co-chaired with the the chair of London Councils. And we'll be speaking to councils. I'm going to a council visit next week to discuss their summer schemes. And one of the things we'll be discussing in relation to the children we're funding to be kept busy during the school holidays is that they receive a nutritional meal whilst they're at a scheme that we're funding to make sure, particularly this summer, they're getting some decent nourishment and their parents are giving some respite in relation to the cost of feeding their kids.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and can I thank you for the actions that you're taking. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Mr Mayor, I have a supplementary question being asked by Assemblymember Best in relation to this question.
Thank you, Chair. This year, London will receive £33 million from the government's holiday activity and food programmes programme. That equates to 16.5% of the total spend for the UK. So that's very good news for London. The holiday provision, as I'm sure you know, is for children aged from reception to year 11 who are in receipt of benefit-related free school meals. Will you commit this summer to going out and visiting one of those programmes and at one of those clubs delivering that across London to see how that programme is being rolled out and to visit the hard-working people that are delivering it on the front line?
I'm more than happy for me, and if I can't, with my deputy mayors to visit that particular scheme. We're doing lots of visits during the course of the summer. I'm going on a visit after this one on a different type of visit, but I'm more than happy for somebody from City Hall to go and thank those hard-working staff, and they're making a difference. Let's be frank in relation to the kids they're helping and stuff. So, of course, somebody from my team, if not me, will go and visit one of those particular schemes.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. The next question is number 2465. It's the name of Assemblymember Hirani. Skills and employment opportunities for disabled Londoners.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for your question. Supporting disabled Londoners to access training and employment opportunities is a key pillar of my skills roadmap for London. I remain committed to working with boroughs and other partners to support more disabled Londoners to find work and to progress in work. Since 2019, when this was devolved to us, I've implemented several changes to the adult education budget, AEB, to make training more accessible for disabled Londoners. These include fully funding some British Sign Language courses and supporting providers to upskill their staff to better meet the needs of learners with special educational needs and disabilities. During 2020 and 2021 academic year, almost 24,300 learners with a self-declared learning difficulty, disability or health problem participated in our adult education programme. Disabled Londoners are also a priority group for my community outreach programme. Small grants are being made available to grassroots organisations to help generate referrals into learning opportunities and promote job opportunities. Through our careers hubs, we're working with special schools and with SEND students in mainstream schools and colleges, linking employers to school career programmes to help more young Londoners to identify suitable career pathways. We also run a pilot project working with SMEs to support the recruitment of disabled young people once they leave FE colleges. Through my Academies programme, I'm helping disabled Londoners to access good work opportunities in London's priority sectors: creative, digital, green, health, hospitality and social care, by building closer partnerships between training providers and employers, building pathways into employment and addressing underrepresentation in the workplace. Our Skills for Londoners Capital programme has already prioritised projects that support learners with SEND, and this will be a key feature of my new capital programme launching later this year. Londoners with physical and learning disabilities will benefit from improved access into and around buildings, technological improvements and better facilities for SEND provision. Going forward, disabled Londoners are a priority group for the No Wrong Door programme, which helps coordinate skills, careers and job-related support, so there is no wrong door for Londoners seeking employment assistance. User journey mapping and research has been undertaken to understand how to meet the needs of disabled Londoners, helping them to get the support they need to access good work.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to acknowledge, I've got constituents from Brent Mencap in the audience and watching online as well. So an apology first, because you could have been forgiven for thinking you're at the Conservative Party leadership debate with some of the blue bickering that we had. But I can assure you, you are at Mayor's question time. So I understand as part of the London Recovery Programme's Good Work for All strand that there is a subgroup looking at issues in relation to structural inequalities, including the issue of disabled Londoners who are suffering in relation to the lack of employment opportunities. Can you highlight the importance of this and also outline the other work that you are doing to support disabled people as part of your recovery plan?
So thank you for your question. Thank you for raising this issue, which doesn't normally get raised at Mayor's question time, and I'm really, really grateful for you raising it, but also it's really important with Brent Mencap watching and their family and friends and others who are interested in this for us to be discussing a really important issue. I am concerned about the waiting list for the government's National Access to Work scheme. It's more than doubled over the last 8 months, which, if you think about it, means too many disabled people left waiting for decisions on the vital support the programme provides to remove barriers. And so what we're doing is, with the work of the London Recovery Board, with the work Jules Pipe's leading in relation to adult education, trying to do what we can, the absence of the support in that scheme being as good as we'd hoped, to narrow the disability employment gap that exists in London. I mentioned in answer to my question the no wrong door principle. To give the government credit, the Department for Work and Pensions are working really closely with us in relation to the scheme we've implemented. I visited an integration hub last week in Hackney, doing some really exciting work with the DWP, Job Centre Plus, colleges, schools providers are getting together to try and ensure that wherever you go, there's no wrong door. But the waiting list is not helping matters, but we've got to do what we can ourselves.
Thank you. And there has been progress made on tackling the disability employment gap. You mentioned the issue around access to work. Actually, before coming to City Hall, working in the disability sector, it was known as the DWP's best kept secret. And it's sad to see that it's deteriorated in the way that it has in recent months. The spreadsheets do not provide a real picture of what's happening out there. For example, the government's disability strategy was criticised by charities and deemed unlawful by the courts as well. What more can government and City Hall do to provide ongoing support to disabled Londoners in the workplace so that they are paid fairly and also treated equally?
I think it's really important that we, City Hall, lead by example. And so we've published now for the first time people's pays and included issues around not just gender, race, but also disability. And there is, even in City Hall, I say even because we should be leading by example, a disability pay gap. So there are things we can do by involving, disabled staff in decisions we're making, designing a new building, right, getting them involved in that we did, and so forth. But also we need an action plan to respond to a disability pay gap. So there are things we can be doing ourselves in relation to putting our own house in order, and then working with colleagues across the private sector as well. So in City Hall, we've got a good work standard you'll be well aware of. Employers we work with, there's now more than 100, I think now 250,000 Londoners are now employed by a good work standard employer. We make sure we have into this issues around improving recruitment, retention, progression of disabled Londoners into their work. Some of the work we're doing in relation to the Good Work Fund, the mission, we're making sure that built into the DNA of that is issues around disability and other issues, race, gender as well. TfL have tried to lead by example. They've got an excellent Steps into Work 12-month programme where they take on disabled people and they work for pay in TfL. And so, the Recovery Board is one way of getting everyone around the table to make sure whether you're the NHS, TfL, private sector, voluntary community sector, councils, we can get our own house in order and then show the country, if London can do it, why can't you?
Assembly Member Hirani, I didn't want to stop your flow, right? Okay, but I didn't think it's bickering that takes place. These are questions took place, and Assembly members on oversight also are asking very serious questions. So it's very important that we recognise that, okay? That Assembly members, even on the Tory party, they're doing their job right. And it adds to the... And it adds to the liveliness of the debate, right? So I really want to just put that on record, okay? Thank you. Can I ask Assemblymember Boff, who wants to come in as supplementary to this question?
Mr. Mayor, as you know, Neurodiversity in Business is an organisation that is actively looking to address the employment prospects of autistic and other neurodiverse Londoners. And back in May, I asked you to meet them, and you expressed some enthusiasm to do so. They have yet to hear from your office, and I wonder when that would be rectified.
Chair, let me follow that up. I do apologise through you to them. Can I follow that up and get back to you and them today to let you know when we're going to meet? Even if it's not soon, we need to date in the diary today. Is that okay?
That is. Thank you.
Thank you. The next question, Mr. Mayor, is 2778. It's the name of Assemblymember Devenish, and it's TfL fleet fines.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for your question. My transport strategy aims to dramatically increase the proportion of journeys that are carried out on foot, by cycle or using public transport to 80% by 2041. For this to be achieved, our road network needs to run smoothly for the benefit not just of buses and other service-level public transport, but for people cycling and for essential road freight and other essential vehicle use. TfL, as the Highway and Traffic Authority for the Transport for London Road Network, is committed to improving the safety, sustainability and reliability of its roads. Good compliance with road regulations is absolutely vital to the safe and efficient operation of the road network in London. 5% of the roads are Transport for London road network, and the rest are managed by London's local authorities. Poor compliance increases road danger and disruption and puts people at risk, especially vulnerable road users. It also causes congestion and delays, increasing journey times for bus users and drivers, which can have a significant impact on London's economy. Road traffic regulations are therefore for the benefit of all road users. Fair and proportionate enforcement of the rule is essential for delivering improved compliance and keeping Londoners safe. For TfL's part, enforcement activities focused on the contraventions and locations that cause the greatest harm in terms of road danger or disruption, particularly to the bus network, which must operate efficiently to help Londoners and visitors move around our city. Blocking junctions and roads, for example, can negatively impact traffic flow and can hinder the passage of emergency vehicles. The importance of these rules applies to all road users. We all have to follow the rules to keep the system operating efficiently. I want to be clear that TfL makes no special allowances for its own staff. TfL drivers, like all motorists, have a responsibility to follow the rules of the road. Where they don't, and there is no good reason, they're required to pay the PCN themselves. Of the 521 PCNs mentioned in the article relating to moving traffic offences, which were issued by various highway authorities over a 5-year period, 100 were successfully appealed through the usual process open to all road users who are issued with a PCN. I make no excuse for TfL staff who break the rules, and have asked TfL to look at what more it needs to do to ensure that those who receive PCNs are properly educated to increase compliance.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So you're saying basically it is the individuals within TfL who are in the wrong. You're not saying that it was anything to do with the road layouts in this case?
No, I don't think so. I looked at the number of PCNs issued, and TfL as a proportion is very low over this 5-year period. I think it's 0.002%. And so, I mean, we only have coverage of 5% of the roads. The 95% roads, the rest of the roads are covered by the councils. I've seen no evidence in preparing for this answer of any problems with those regulations in relation to what those councils do. But if there are particular concerns you've got, I'm more than happy to take them away.
Okay, I'll leave it there. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. The next question is number 2743. Is a member of Assembly Member Fortune. It's about the ULEZ expansion.
Thank you, Chair. I've made it clear that I want to offer the largest scrappage scheme feasible if I take forward the proposal for a London-wide ULEZ following the public consultation. The future scrappage scheme will be informed by the integrated impact assessment and responses to the consultation. But the number of Londoners we can help depends on funding, and at present I simply cannot say how much money will be available. The government has provided scrappage funding in other cities, including Birmingham, Manchester and Portsmouth, but has not extended the same support for London. We're using our own resources to do a job that should be led by central government through a targeted national scrappage scheme. If a national scheme is not forthcoming, I have requested specific funding from the government for a London scheme, a local London scheme. Should this not be made available, we'll need to understand what other funding mechanisms may be viable. Londoners will know that when I say I'll provide the largest scrappage scheme possible, I mean it. When the government failed to provide a single penny for scrappage in London for previous iterations of the ULEZ, working to achieve aims on air quality the government claims to share, I stepped up and we provided £61 million for a scrappage scheme. It is important to me that any scrappage scheme is targeted at those who really need it to make the most of the funding pot. Our previous scrappage schemes supported low-income, disabled Londoners, small businesses and charities to scrap over 15,200 older, more polluting vehicles. Already, more than 84% of vehicles seen driving in outer London meet the ULEZ standards, meaning the vast majority of drivers would not need to pay anything should the expansion be confirmed. The proposals in the consultation also include extensions to grace periods, including for those with disabled tax-classed vehicles. This will help many disabled Londoners as they will no longer have to comply. I'm listening carefully to the public and stakeholders on whether more can be done to support vulnerable people while maintaining the integrity of the scheme. I've committed to providing the largest scheme feasible and will continue to work with the government and the other metro mayors to push for a consistent national approach to scrappage that allows us and the government to meet air quality targets and deliver cleaner air for London and the UK as a whole.
Thank you very much for that answer, and thank you for sticking to the financial side of it as well. That is appreciated. We're getting to a head now with the consultation around the expanded ULEZ, and it is causing a lot of concern in outer London. It really is. Especially for those people, as Assemblymember Bakari was talking about earlier, who are digitally excluded, so they've not been able to sort of take part in some of the processes. Let's say the government do not come forward with any financial assistance for a scrappage scheme. You've said that you commit to the largest scheme that you can put in place that's feasible. Have you got any ballpark figures for that?
No, I couldn't today, for a variety of reasons anyway. If the government hear me saying we've got X pounds to,
I get that. I guess what people would be concerned about is an idea of the sort of the tide going out, so that there's the largest that's feasible, as you say, to put in, but it's not enough to cover some of those people that are really going to need the support.
And I understand that concern, by the way.
Yeah.
All I'd say is, and I say this hopefully not in a polemic way, so hopefully there won't be a lot of noise coming from that side of the room. Judge me on my record, right? Last time there was no money from the government, we found £61 million, which supported the categories I mentioned: poorer Londoners, disabled Londoners, small businesses, and charities. I don't think it's possible to extend a scheme like we want to do without a scrappage scheme, for the reasons that you've talked about in relation to the concern your constituents have. I can't give you a figure, and we are still hopeful, because the government has similar ends to us in relation to zero carbon. I appreciate there may be differences in means, and so that's why we're hoping there'll be a change of leadership, a new Transport Secretary, a new Chancellor, so it's not all doom and gloom in relation to us getting progress with the new lot that come in.
Okay. And we touched on the consultation. Have you got any idea what the sort of consultation response rate is at the moment? What's it looking like?
No, I've not seen it for weeks. I'm busy with other things, obviously. I think it closes at the end of this month, and so...
Yeah, the 29th it closes, because one of the things that I'd be interested in looking at is how we audit those responses as well. Where have those responses come from? Can we break out where it's come from across the country?
This is not TfL's first rodeo in relation to consultations. I'm more than happy for TfL, because there's a lot of technical expertise involved, and I'm not going to pretend I'm on top of it. I'm more than happy for TfL to meet with a member. Again, I suggest with Deputy Mayor Seb Dance and stuff. Anybody else interested to talk through how they've done things in the past, and I suspect that they'll be more than happy to meet with you and to address or alleviate any concerns you might have.
Because the technical point is interesting, because we had the CFO, or the new CFO of TfL in last week, who talked about there's a significant recruitment process going on in terms of getting technicians in to look at road user charging. Are you aware of that?
So, well, he's not the CFO. Otherwise, he'd be appalled. Right, he'd be appalled if he was called the CFO. And I'm not sure. Patrick, he's doing a great job, by the way, as the interim CFO. No, what's happening is it's part of the consultation. The ultimate prize is to get rid of the congestion charge, to get rid of the ultra-low emission zone, and have a really simple system in relation to a smart road user charging scheme that we've talked about in the past. So we've asked people to respond to this idea in the consultation. I'm sure you've seen the document in the consultation. And so we've asked TfL to start doing some work in relation to this, because nobody in the world had tried the C-charge before we brought it in. Nobody in the world tried the ULEZ, and so a lot of it is doing the work in advance to see whether it's possible. You'll remember we spoke probably 2 years ago about, for example, a Greater London boundary charge, and some work was done, which then it couldn't be used because we chose not to go down that road. And similarly, we did some work in relation to a carbon charge. You know, everyone pays X pence to use their car, which was discounted earlier on this year. So it's not unusual for TfL to do pieces of work which doesn't necessitate anything in particular, but I am interested in
and it does make sense to look at it. I think it makes sense to look at it on a national level, because there are taxation elements that go with it. And again, you know, just to put in that, I think everybody's moving in the same direction, which is to get the cleanest air possible. It's you know, what's the process, what's the vehicle, if you'll excuse the pun, that you use to do that. So when you look at some of the research papers or where the road user charging has been rolled out elsewhere, you'll see that you get to a sort of a tax neutral position. So, for example, Londoners, if you had a road user charging model in London, Londoners might expect not to be paying that fuel duty tax or vehicle excise duty, etc. So that's one of the challenges with bringing in a road user model unilaterally. And I guess, and this is the last point, in that, so the significant members of staff coming in are already being recruited to look at the technical aspects of road user charging. The model, as I understand it, the model they're looking at can only be built off the back of an expanded camera network, which we're consulting on, so we haven't agreed on. So if the consultation comes back that, you know, people in London are overwhelmingly negative towards it, A, are you in a position to say, okay, we're not going to move ahead with that? And B, if you don't move ahead with it, how do you get to the road user charging position anyway?
So there are a number of issues raised there. So, so when I was in government in transport in 2009, we looked into the issue of smart road user charging, because it's attractive to the Treasury, right, for obvious reasons that you mentioned, particularly as more vehicles go electric, and so there's less money coming in through the usual way to the Treasury. So I'm not sure it's revenue neutral, by the way, in relation to that. But the point that you make is important because of road tax. So the point will be, with respect, the way I'd frame it is, London drivers are paying a road tax, and they're the benefits of the road tax, because all of it is spent out of the country except for a small minority. Yet on top of that, they could be required to pay a smart road user charging, as well as the road tax. What should happen is, in my view, is the road tax goes for Londoners, or we get back the money Londoners pay. Otherwise, London motorists are subsidising motorists outside of the country, outside of the city, and paying a smart road user charging.
That's what I meant by the neutral.
Yeah, and so that's a concern. And we are having conversations with the government on this. And the good news is, I know there are at least 320 people running to be the next Tory leader, but one of them in the final two is talking about this. And so it's watch this space in relation to evolution of thought in this area.
I'm really sorry, I've overrun my time.
Sorry.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think Assemblymember Garrett wants to come in as a supplementary to this question.
Sure.
Thank you, Chair. For the proposal to expand ULEZ to the whole of London, who's the decision maker to do that or not do that?
Me.
So it's your decision whether that proceeds or not. Thanks. My question is about the cost of that. So the independent impact assessment, which you referred to earlier, says that it will make no difference, this expansion will make no difference on climate change, no difference on particulate emissions or particulate quality in the air, and very minor difference in nitrogen dioxide levels. When you look at the hardship that that's going to impose on people, how in your judgment is that worth proceeding with?
So I don't recognise the no nitrogen dioxide or particulate matter or carbon.
Okay, well, so on the independent impact assessment, table 9.5 on page 165 says that, to take two places at random, Sutton's particulate level will go from 9.5 without the scheme to 9.5 with the scheme. Croydon's will go from 9.6 without the scheme to 9.6 with the scheme, so that's no change. Nitrogen dioxide levels from 19.5 to 19.2, Sutton 19.0 to 18.7, Croydon, those are very typical levels. No real change in particulate levels.
That's all right.
From 1.5. So table 9. Table 9.5 on page 165 of the integrated impact assessment. Those are the figures.
Right. So I'll look at that particular page. I've not got that page in my bundle, as you'd appreciate. But no. So we've already seen reductions in all those things in relation to central. In inner, we've seen reductions in nitrogen oxide. And the expert analysis is further reductions in nitrogen dioxide should it be expanded, and there'll be further reductions in particulate matter and carbon emissions. I'm more than happy to look at the table that the member refers to. That is not.
Sorry, I'm not sure. This is the integrated impact assessment that is on the page where people go to do the consultation. Those are the figures on that table. Yeah. I've given you the table number and the page number. I don't understand how you're quibbling with those figures. That is what they're saying will be the estimate.
Well, what I'm saying is I don't recognise those figures. But what I can tell you is we've seen both in central London ULEZ and in the inner London ULEZ a reduction in those things, and the projections are a further reduction should the ULEZ be extended and expanded, because we can see there are fewer non-compliant vehicles, because we can see there are fewer vehicles overall, and because the air quality monitors are showing a big improvement in air quality. So
it sounds like the decision that you're going to make to proceed is going to be based on ignoring the integrated impact assessment figures.
Well, no. The decision I make is based upon the integrated impact assessment, based upon the responses to consultations and other information that I've received and will receive. But what I'm telling you is the evidence so far is that the policy has led to better air in central London and inner London. We want all, and by the way, on the borders of outer London, we want all of London to benefit from clean air, not just those in central and inner.
So you're referring to the 6-month review of the previous expansion that was published on Tuesday? When you say the previous research, is that what that's the most recent research of an existing thing that's been...
We've got research that starts from 2017 going forward. So 2017 to 2019, then the research from October 2021 up until now. And there's a various work also done that's set out in various of the pieces of work that have already been published.
But the document that came out on Tuesday said that for all the reasons that are entirely obvious to everyone, e.g. a pandemic, the fuel price shortage last year, the price spike in fuel currently, there's no way to establish whether the reductions in traffic, which are what's caused the changes in air quality, are due to ULEZ or not.
No, what the report says, and it's peer-reviewed, is unarguable that there's been a reduction in nitrogen dioxide.
Yes, but the question is why that's because of the reduction in traffic levels. What it says is there's no way to attribute that reduction in traffic levels to the ULEZ.
But because
it's on page 12.
Because there's a return to pre-pandemic levels of traffic, you'd expect to see a commensurate increase in poor quality air. You've not seen that because what you're seeing is fewer non-compliant vehicles. So 67,000 fewer non-compliant vehicles must have an impact on air quality. 44,000 fewer diesel cars driving around must have an impact on air quality. 20,000 fewer vehicles overall must have an impact. And then you go to 20% reduction in NOx. There's the impact.
But the reduction in non-compliant vehicles would have occurred anyway, some level of that from cars naturally being replaced.
7,000.
And as I say, the report that you're talking about that came out on Tuesday specifically says on page 12, so it's limitations of this analysis. It says there's no way to tell how much of the reduction is due to the pandemic, how much was due to the price spike, and how much was due to fuel price surge, and so we need to keep monitoring. So it flatly contradicts what you're saying. So it doesn't give me confidence that you're going to rely on other documents if they don't say what you want them to say.
And we are monitoring. Just like, for example, we saw in inner London a reduction by 37% of NOx just from the central London ultra-low emission zone. That 37% is not completely attributable to the ULEZ in central London, because some of that is because of cleaner buses. Some of that is because more people using public transport. So I accept in relation to some of the stats, you can't say they're all due to the ULEZ, but you can't run away from the fact that the expansion of ULEZ over 6 months has led to reduced nitrogen dioxide, and also returns to
but it says you cannot attribute it to. That's what it says.
Return to pre-pandemic levels of traffic, but not a return to
it also says there hasn't been a return to pre-pandemic traffic. The report also says there hasn't been a return to pre-pandemic traffic. You referred to people switching to public transport. So the integrated impact assessment also says, page 87, it points out the obvious fact that it says for inner London, the bottom 20% most deprived areas still have relatively high levels of access to public transport, while in outer London there are much larger areas with low PTAL scores in areas of high deprivation, which is also where it points out is where you find more non-compliant vehicles. do you not think that undermines what you're talking about, which is it induces a switch to public transport? It's not going to happen if there's no public transport alternative. Instead, it will just impose a cost of living burden. Do you recognise that in outer London?
You need to have decent public transport. So one of the things we're trying to do is to improve public transport in outer London, which is really important.
By next August,
to give people the alternatives. Well, it depends where that there is a paucity of public transport that needs improvement is. In relation to the point about reliance...
So my residents in Croydon and Sutton, if they have this imposed on them, what improvements will there be by August next year when you're proposing to bring this in, 13 months away?
A lot of your residents in Croydon and Sutton who are poorer don't own a vehicle.
And a lot of them do. Those are the ones who are hit by your cost of living charge.
So the cost of living charge is now what they're going to call it. We saw similar arguments in 2021. We saw how that movie ended.
Look, it becomes apparent because when Assemblymember Ahmad asked you about cost of living, you showed great sympathy for people who are struggling. Yeah. When I point out, or when anyone points out,
I was going to answer your question and you interrupted it with a charge.
The imposition of this charge and the effect that will have in terms of hardship on people who are struggling, who will struggle under the burden of your ULEZ charge, you seem to show no sympathy for them at all.
Is it my turn now? Okay. So if you look at the car ownership in our city, almost half of Londoners don't own a car. And it's the poorest Londoners who don't own a car who suffer the worst consequences of air quality, including in Croydon and Sutton. In fact, we had an exchange, Senator Fortune and I, a couple of MQTs ago, where I think we agreed...
I fact-checked it, you were wrong.
Senator Garrett, can we let the Mayor answer the question, please? This is not a two-way conversation, by the way.
It is a two-way conversation, and he's not answering the question.
Can we just give him an opportunity to answer the question, please?
Do you recognise the cost of living burden? That's the question. If you're not going to answer it, there's no point spending time listening to you talking about something else.
Let's move on, Chair. What's
Good
the point?
idea. Let's move on, Chair. Thank you.
What's the point?
Assemblyman Garrett, you must have the patience to listen to answers, and even the answers which you may not like.
He's behaving like Jacob Rees-Mogg. I mean, come on. Yeah, it's just...
Okay.
Are we allowing that kind of remark? Is that in order under your regime?
We better press on, okay? Yeah. Because I think we've exhausted this.
I'm happy to respond, but
I know.
I can't be interrupted every 30 seconds.
Yes. Okay, I am going to bring in Assemblymember Duval to a supplementary to this.
You'll have to listen to him as well.
Mr. Mayor, do you not think it's a bit sort of hypocritical when people pick and choose which cost of livings cost that they want to raise in political debate, and in particularly in terms of this issue, when we know, and actually the independent report tells us, that actually the extension of ULEZ was a success. What the member fails to realise when he cherry picks some of the independent report is it COVID? And that's the question about those figures. Is that where we are? But I'd like your views around cost of living issues and which ones we raise in political debates and which ones we frightened of raising in political debates.
Look, one of the reasons the experts wanted 12 months rather than 6 months is because it gets out these particular fluctuations. It was the pressure from the Assembly. If you remember, every month since October, they've been asking for an update on the results of the US expansion. Well, lo and behold, we do an update 6 months later, which has caveats, and then they're criticised for the caveats. And so they're damned if they do and damned if they don't. But I never hear this side talking about inflation at 9-10%. I never hear this side talking about public pay increases being less than inflation, so they're ostensibly pay cuts. I never hear this side talking about a 54% increase in energy prices, or this side talking about pensioners choosing between turning on a fan or feeding themselves, or parents skipping a meal so they can feed their kids. So you can understand why I sort of, I'm surprised when suddenly, for the first time ever, they use those three words, cost of living, and then pointing the finger at me as somehow I'm responsible.
Just remind us in the debate that you were having with TfL.
Hang on. Can we please listen to the debate?
Do you want to come back in?
Can we stop, please, disrupting?
Is this coming off my time, Chair?
Hope not.
Okay. So, Mr. Mayor, can you tell me, just remind me of the debate, because I think you mentioned to this Assembly that the government stance in terms of congestion charging and putting up the congestion charge, switching away from the air quality charge, if we can call it that, rather than their cost of living charge. Can you just remind us what the government stance was and what they were trying to make you do?
Yeah, well, firstly, there was silence from this side when they did this, but the government wrote me a letter and said to receive additional support, you're required to increase congestion charge to £15, and it cover all of London, which I think includes Croydon and Sutton. No complaints raised from anybody there. Wouldn't say boo to a goose.
Thank you. Assembly members, I think, judging the energy in the room, I think we've reached half point now. And I'm going to advise that we have a comfort break of 10 minutes, and we come back again at 11:50. Thank you. The published question list. The next question, Mr. Mayor, is number 2487. It's the name of Assemblymember McCartney on the Metropolitan Police Commissioner.
Thank you for your question. The Home Secretary and I have agreed that Sir Mark Rowley is the best person to lead the Met Police Service as the new Commissioner at this extremely challenging time. A series of appalling scandals alongside failing performance have not only exposed deep cultural problems within the MPS, but have contributed to a crisis of confidence in London's police service. It's crucial that the new Commissioner prioritises improving performance and rebuilding the public's trust and confidence in the police, which is so vital to policing by consent. This should include root and branch reforms to ensure the MPS can deliver the basics better, an overhaul of disciplinary processes, and systemic changes to the Met Police Service culture. I've been clear that the new Commissioner must have a clear plan to win back trust and confidence and address the deep cultural issues that we know exist in the police in relation to sexism, misogyny, racism, homophobia and discrimination. It's also important that Londoners hear the new leadership of the Met Police Service publicly acknowledge the scale and depth of the problems we have seen in the force. This will be a crucial first step for the new Commissioner to begin rebuilding trust and confidence with London's communities. The new Commissioner will not be able to fix these problems alone, and he needs to be ready to bring in outside expertise and oversight to ensure he can deliver the systemic organisational change from top to bottom that's required. He needs to ensure every rank and part of the MPS is working towards a shared goal, and that all staff are being held to account for delivering on the values Londoners rightly expect from their police force. Sir Mark has demonstrated that he's the right person to lead this change, and the experience he's gained outside policing over the last 4 years and previously from other forces in the country will bring a valuable new perspective to the MPS. I look forward to supporting him and working closely with the Home Secretary as we work to restore trust and confidence in the police.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And Mr. Mayor, you've been clear that you want a reforming Commissioner. Mark Rowley says he has a 100-day plan to make change. What internal reforms do you believe are needed?
Well, the sort of reforms that I talked about in the speech I recently delivered on police reform is I set out a number of things that need to be addressed in addition to what I said in my answer to your first question. Yes, at the same time as getting the bread and butter issues right, the first class emergency response, we need a more robust vetting of new and serving police officers. Our recruitment process is going to be changed to make sure we only get the best people for the job. We need to have far-ranging changes on the misconduct process. It's got to happen. We need to ensure that the police have proactive measures to weed out those who should never have been allowed to become police officers in the first place. We've got to address some of the issues raised by the HMI in relation to supervision, training, culture and overall performance. And actually, one of the reasons why it's important is because those brave, dedicated, decent officers who are trying their best deserve the police top leadership to get this right, as does the public. And I think Sir Mark is working on his plan. He wants to make sure he hits the ground running. And we need to do what we can to, yes, challenge the police, but also support them.
Thank you. And you mentioned trust and confidence with the public. That is extremely low at the moment, particularly amongst Black Londoners, which have always had a lower confidence rate, but increasingly amongst women as well, given recent challenges. And Mark Rowley has talked about the need for a renewal of policing by consent. What, in your mind, does that look like?
Well, what's been a pattern of the last 4 or 5 years, right? Black Londoners, women Londoners, myself, others raise issues, and the police are defensive, they're in denial, and we're criticised for holding the police to account. What we need is an acknowledgement that there are challenges in the police service. This isn't a few rotten apples or some wrong uns, as some would claim. These are deep cultural issues that need to be addressed, and I think that's what we hope to see from the new Commissioner as he prioritises the issues that matter to Londoners. And by the way, the more trust there is in policing, the less crime there's going to be. So it's integral to policing by consent, so that everyone's a winner and we can solve this issue. There's no downside, except for the criminals.
Indeed. Now, it's clear that you have oversight of the police via MOPAC, but the Met retain operational control, how they go about doing their job. So can I ask, going forward, what oversight will MOPAC have, and how are you going to ensure that the reforms are actually taking place?
So a number of things. It's just worth reminding colleagues that the Police and Crime Committee of the GLA has oversight of the Met Police Service, regular bills of clean health, Home Affairs Select Committee, Home Secretary, Policing Minister, and of course the Mayor's Office of Policing and Crime as well. So, and of those people, there's only one category of those people who have been consistent in expressing concerns about some of these issues that have been highlighted by the HMI report. So MOPAC will work closely with the new Commissioner and his team in relation to the work we do with HMI in relation to the engaged process. The Deputy Mayor for Policing and Crime recently attended with the Acting Commissioner a meeting with HMI, and I'll be meeting with them in September with the new Commissioner to discuss the action plan to respond to concerns raised by HMI in the recent report that they presented. There's going to be several pieces of engagement directly with Londoners. Clearly, work needs to be done to ensure the Met Police Service staff get it and understand the expectations on them. And so, look, at the same time as doing the bread and butter issues, continue to make progress in reducing violent crime and so forth, it's really important that the issue of the systemic challenges raised by HMI, but also the issues of trust and confidence are dealt with.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Mr Mayor, I have Assemblymember Pigeon wants to come in as a supplementary to this question.
Sure.
Thank you. The new Commissioner, Sir Mark Rowley, brings vast experience in operational policing. But the Met's toxic culture and organisational failings cannot be resolved just by a change at the top alone. It requires the input of experts in change management. Will you agree to appoint experts in organisational and cultural change to the Met's management board to ensure the new Commissioner gets the expert support and advice needed to deliver the radical change required?
Look, I'm always careful not to trespass into operational matters, but Sir Mark understands the importance of getting the right team around him, and also he's acknowledged the importance of outside expertise, and so I'll make sure that Sir Mark sees the comments raised by the Assembly member, which may help develop his thinking around this issue. But at the core of what the member's saying, I think you're right in relation to the narrow-mindedness in relation to some of the views that can happen in an organisation, and sometimes bringing somebody else in. You know, the Met Police Service isn't the first organisation which has issues in relation to status quo, always known best, and that change culture, outside expertise can help, whether it's ad hoc or whether it's somebody in the management board. But you know, the way you've said what you've said, I think it's really important for Sir Mark to see that. I'll make sure that's passed on.
Lovely. And in February, you announced that the previous Commissioner had lost your confidence, based in part on her inability to set out the scale of reform needed in her letter to you of the 4th of February. And on the 17th of June, you gave a speech outlining the changes that you think the Met needs, including things like improving training and supervision. What is so different between what was included in that former Commissioner's letter and the speech you gave? Because when I compare them both, they're almost identical in the direction you see and she saw the police going.
Well, I can promise you the former Commissioner would never have delivered that speech that I delivered or written that speech that I delivered. You've got to acknowledge there's a problem. If you don't acknowledge there's a big problem, how can you fix it? And one of the things I said in answer to the previous question raised by Senator McCartney was, you know, this culture of denial, and not understanding there's an issue, and defensiveness. You know, if you rotten apples, if you wrong uns, it's more than that. And it pains me because I know there are thousands, tens of thousands of dedicated, decent, brave officers, and they're being let down, as indeed are Londoners. So, you know, how can we have confidence in your prognosis if your diagnosis is wrong?
The diagnosis. OK, that's clear. Thank you for that. In July last year, you said, one of my jobs as the Mayor is to provide scrutiny of the police service to help provide the checks and balances in a vibrant democracy. But your Office of Policing and Crime is supposed to support you in this work, but it would certainly appears to me, to be failing to perform. Will you be reviewing how your Office of Policing and Crime works and its effectiveness in light of the state of the Met?
Well, on a regular basis over the last 6 years, members of the Assembly have criticised the size of MOPAC, even though its core budget in relation to supervision is less than other equivalent police forces around the country. So you can't have it both ways. If you want to have more people doing supervision, it means more staff.
I'm asking whether you are now going to review it because of what's happened with the Met.
Well, a lot of the issues that were raised by the HMI and led me to make my decision came from the work of MOPAC. MOPAC on at least 2 occasions have got HMI involved in issues that they're concerned about. Regularly in contact with the police watchdog, in relation to issues that we have. We always review and evolve how we do stuff, not least when it comes to budget setting and so forth. And so MOPAC does more than simply help me in scrutinising the police. As I said, it commissions services, provides services and does other work as well. So we're always looking at what all our functional bodies can do better, and that includes MOPAC.
And you may need some more focused support given the period we're in with the Met Police. You claimed earlier that you've been raising issues both privately and publicly for years about the performance of the Met and concerns you've had. A number of us have raised for many years publicly concerns about the Met. But at the end of June, you said last year, I quote, I've been saying for some time Londoners deserve better. But July last year, you said, I say loudly and clearly, the police have my full confidence and full support. Given how low confidence is in London in the Met Police, 49%, do you regret taking so long to arrive at the decision that you didn't have confidence in the Met's leadership and change happen?
There'll be no doubt the police have my full support and my full confidence, right? You can distinguish supporting the police service and holding them to account. I'm the opposite of someone who's been defunding the police. I've given the police more funding than any man in the history of our city, so I support the police, giving them the right kit, supporting them when they're being attacked in ways that are unfair. At the same time, I've got to hold them to account as well. It's possible to do both. What I'm not in favour of is spending all my time bashing the police, as some people do, or spending all my time blindly defending the police even when they've done wrong.
Do you regret you took so long in terms of your confidence in the Met's leadership to take that decision?
I don't regret my actions in relation to what happened with Cressida Dick, in relation to how she went, in relation to my decision to express lack of concern, lack of confidence in the response she had to the serious issues that had been raised. I will have to wait and see in relation to what happens with the Met going forward, but I'm confident that Sir Mark gets it. That he wants to be a reforming commissioner, that he won't, begin the job in a defensive way or in denial, and he appreciates the importance of trust and confidence to the ability of the police to fight crime and reduce crime.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, we go on to the next question. Question number 2758 has been withdrawn. So we go over to 2670. On TfL bonuses in the name of Assemblymember Prince.
Thank you, Chair. The premise of the member's question is incorrect. To clarify, 597 TfL and Crossrail staff received total remuneration of more than £100,000 in 2020-2021, a figure that includes all elements of pay, such as basic pay, overtime, and voluntary severance, not just bonus payments. In fact, in my time in office, the number of TfL staff on a salary of more than £100,000 has dropped by nearly 20%. The past 2 years have been some of the most difficult in London Transport's history, and staff have worked tirelessly to ensure that transport services remain safe, clean and reliable throughout the pandemic, whilst facing significant financial challenges. At the same time, TfL has been working hard to drive down operating costs and become ever more efficient as it supports the economic recovery of the city. And most recently, staff have been working on the entirely avoidable project of attempting to persuade the government to properly fund London, all the while with little certainty about the future of their roles and the roles of their colleagues. Given the financial pressures resulting from the pandemic, it was right that TfL suspended performance awards in 2020-2021. Following that suspension, TfL implemented a revised performance award arrangement for 2021-22 and 22-23. Bonuses are part of TfL's remuneration package and retention strategy designed to attract and retain highly skilled staff. These staff are providing a vital public service to Londoners, often lower paid than they could earn in the private sector. This is especially true in the engineering and tech fields, where there is a shortfall in the number of specialists required to meet demand. However, since I was first elected, I've been clear that I wanted to see salary costs for the senior levels of staff brought down, and TfL has taken action to control salaries and bonuses in recent years, including by reducing management layers and eliminating duplication to make TfL a more efficient organisation. I've also been clear with TfL that one-off payments to departing TfL staff must be minimised. These huge departure payments are the legacy of the sky-high salaries and long notice periods agreed under the previous mayor. All performance awards earned during 2021-22 and 22-23 will be paid only if TfL reaches financial sustainability by April 23, with staff needing to still be working for TfL at that point to receive the award. This has been agreed as part of TfL's funding agreement with the government.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That's very helpful. As you will know, Mr. Mayor, the Chief Executive of Crossrail left recently. What sort of bonus do you think he can expect?
I'm not sure in relation to bonus that he may expect, but it's worth reminding colleagues that Mark Wilde became Chief Executive of Crossrail in 2018 at a time when there was chaos in relation to the plans being inherited from the standalone company. In 2020, TfL took over Crossrail working with Mark Wilde as Chief Executive, and he delivered Crossrail in the first half of 2022 as had been promised when he took over as Chief Executive. I don't know.
Be clear that I'm not making any criticism of the work that Mark did. I thought he did a great job actually during his time as Chief Exec and delivered a project that was clearly behind. But can you confirm, Mr. Mayor, that when the Chief Exec or Mr. Wilde receives his bonuses, that will be a decision that was one which you took and that you've agreed?
Just to be clear, do you mean a severance payment or a bonus? Because I've agreed no bonus, so I'm not sure what he means.
Well, let's say a severance, but any payment.
Yeah. So if you bring in a job quicker than would otherwise be the case, and you're no longer required, you receive a severance payment. And so I simply don't know what the severance payment would be for Mark Wilde, but he did leave sooner than would otherwise be the case because we managed to open Crossrail, and because the staff in TfL, ostensibly Andy Lord, is taking over the day-to-day run-ins, we didn't require a Chief Executive of Crossrail to carry on doing that job.
Sure. So you'll let us know, will you, Mr. Mayor?
I think it will be... what normally happens is all severance payments are published in a remuneration report, which is published whenever TfL publishes those.
Fine, and that's your decision, yeah?
I think the remuneration report is published as part of the statement of accounts, which is a TfL board decision.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I have Assemblymember Baker who wants to come in as a supplementary to this question.
Sure.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. I mean, I welcome the Conservative Group's concerns about high pay and bonuses, and personally look forward to their focus on how to curb high pay and bonuses in the city, which frankly dwarf those mentioned here. But that's not normally their focus. Instead, we've heard over weeks and months fixation on travel passes and decent pensions for TfL staff, and those staff that kept London moving through the pandemic, some of whom lost their lives and are struggling with the impact of cost of living and of working with no certain future for the organisation that their livelihoods depend on. Why do you think ordinary staff conditions are so often the focus for the Conservative group to attack, rather than calling for the proper funding that will allow people to have safe and secure jobs?
Yeah, I mean, the other thing is, I mean, you'd imagine that this time when those aspiring to be the Prime Minister are courting the votes of Conservative members, this is a time when there's maximum power to influence a future Conservative Prime Minister, Chancellor and Secretary of State. So this is the maximum time for members of the Assembly who are members of the Conservative Party to have influence over policies in the Conservative Party. And some of the decisions the government's made over the last 2 years have inhibited our ability to provide decent service across our city. And you'll know of the concerns we've got about managed decline. I make this really important point because people don't understand this. In March 2020 and in the following weeks and months, the trade unions were integral in us keeping transport running, in their staff, their members, our workers turning up to work when some of their colleagues were losing their lives. We don't hear, by the way, any concern about the lives lost of the 100+ transport workers who've lost their lives in our city, many of them members of trade unions, and it's worth recognising the challenges they faced. And in my view, one of the reasons why you're going to see concern, not just from transport workers, but from those who work in the NHS, those who work in schools and other public sector workers this summer and this autumn, is because their pay is not commensurate with the challenges they faced in relation to cost of living.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. We move on to the next question, which is 2435. It's in the name of Assemblymember Cooper and is on green bonds for London.
Thank you, Chair. I'm committed to making London net zero carbon by 2030, and I'm clear that the GLA Group should lead by example. One way of helping to achieve this is through our green bond scheme, which allows us to borrow now to finance green infrastructure and repay the borrowing over time using the savings achieved from lower energy bills or related revenue streams. The GLA is a large trusted organisation with an AA credit rating, meaning we can achieve economies of scale through this approach while achieving the best possible borrowing terms. To really make the most of this opportunity, we will offer participation to London boroughs and other public bodies so they can benefit from our economies of scale too. Like for like, green bonds can provide better value for money with better borrowing terms than any other borrowing options, because with more and more people coming to understand the severity of the climate crisis we're all facing, investor demand for assets with a positive environmental impact is increasing. Of course, financial plans like this are always subject to market conditions, and there's been a lot of upheaval in recent months. Our approach to the green bond scheme will respond closely to the market and the need to secure the best value for money. Alongside the £4 million to develop the high-impact green investment opportunities for the public and private sector, I've allocated £86 million specifically to support a substantial GLA green bond programme, financing direct decarbonisation investment by the GLA Group and its strategic partners. This investment will support projects making social housing and public buildings energy efficient, as well as clean local energy projects providing solar PV, heat pumps and district heating across London. By leading the way with this initial £90 million commitment, we're working to help unlock over £500 million to finance low-carbon projects across the city. To make sure we get the biggest impact for every pound we invest, we're in the process of assembling a small team of expert analysts working closely with officers across the GLA Group.
And I'll now turn on my microphone. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I wonder if you could set out for us how the Green Bond Scheme might improve the lives of ordinary Londoners, for example, those in my constituency of Merton and Wandsworth. You just ran through a list of the kind of things that it might go towards. Could you give us a couple of four examples?
Well, it's worth putting on record a direct benefit your constituents are facing from your lobbying in relation to a low-emission bus zone, which means in Putney High Street, which had record levels of pollution when I first became mayor, which you brought to my attention. That was the first area that benefited from our low-emission bus zones. Similarly, what we're going to do is use your knowledge of your area through your council as well. What sort of things we can do to help finance improvements in relation to energy efficiency, lower bills. Think about social housing. Now that there's decent leadership in Wandsworth Council, maybe they'll want to work with us in relation to not just more council housing, but retrofitting the currently existing social housing, low-cost housing. So there's insulation, better glazing. You can benefit from some of the district heating we're doing, and so forth. And that's something we want to do, working with councils, through London councils, and directly. There are other local projects you may know of, or you may want to tell us about, local MPs or the council, to help reduce the footprint in your area. You've got a number of fire stations in your area. You may want to work with the LFB to lobby us, and similarly a police presence in your area as well. So we're trying to work with partners in terms of the public sector. The NHS are crucial, and so if you've got any GP practices or health clinics that want to work with us, if not through the NHS London, work with us in relation to projects they've got, more than happy in relation to this. The idea is to leverage in private sector finance to support reducing our carbon footprint across our city.
I think that's really exciting to hear that, and I've no doubt that local authorities, housing associations will start to take advantage of this in this very, very practical way. And I might well come to talk to you or talk to the staff who are looking at this in detail about the Henry Prince estate, where there are roofs, where there could be solar, and a river that runs behind. I don't know whether you've ever been to the Henry Prince estate. You must go there sometime.
A lot of my misspent youth was spent there, and doing things I shouldn't in that River Wandle either.
Do you think, though, that your Green Bond scheme is ambitious enough? Because having had a look at what happened with the government Green Gilts launch, it was oversubscribed by 12 times. So there's obviously a very big appetite for this. Can you scale up this scheme if it turns out to be equally oversubscribed? Yeah,
we've got to be careful, particularly with interest rates going up. I mean, the government, I think, I may have this figure wrong, but had to pay, I want to give a figure in case it's wrong, a lot more back in interest because of the gilts over the last few weeks with interest rates rising. So the same applied with London Power. You've got to be careful not to go in with jumping with both feet because you get burnt. We've seen across the country other cities being burnt by their experience with their energy supplies. We haven't been, by the way. And similarly with the green bonds, as it is, £9 million equates to £500 million. and so we'll see how it works in the first year or so, first couple of years, and see if there's more ability to, pump prime this area, to act as a catalyst to get private sector money. And the good news is there's a big appetite in the private sector, not just because their shareholders are demanding it and because their customers are demanding it, because they understand the future is green in relation to you can't really think about fossil fuel investment and so forth. And by the way, we should be incredibly proud. We've divested from fossil fuels as far as GLA is concerned, and our partners across London, working with mayors across the globe now. We've divested from more than $400 billion away from fossil fuels, working with 18 other cities. And so that shows where we lead, others follow, and the same goes with green bonds.
Yes, I think the cautious beginning and then making decisions in the light of the emerging situation, which is exactly what City Hall did with London Power, is clearly the best approach with the new Green Bond Initiative. Thinking of the government, however, and we appear to have an absolute vacuum of green ideas. The only one that I've heard of so far is rival candidates, obviously now down to two, talking about removing the green levy on energy bills. How important is it that cities like London and Manchester and elsewhere around the country lead the way in terms of seizing these opportunities to take us to net zero in the light of the huge fires that we've seen this week and the massive pressure on infrastructure?
Well, let me be clear, you on a regular basis challenge me, rightly so, in relation to what support I give in Londoners to insulate their homes. The money we give in relation to the Warm Homes Grant, a lot of that comes from the Green Levy. So if somebody's saying remove the Green Levy, unless it's replaced from general taxation, our ability to support families, poorer families, pensioners, to have warmer homes through the grant will go.
And can we just dig into that about the insulation there just for a minute? Because you're talking about it in terms of warmer homes. But of course, insulation, both in the loft and wall insulation, which we're very poor at, we have very leaky buildings in this country, also stops the heat from coming in.
Yeah, so at least the cooler homes in summer, warmer homes in winter also reduces your bills. But also imagine if those homes, which had smaller bills, warmer in winter, cooler in summer, also had energy supply that's from renewable sources, whether it's what we do in North London with the heat from tube, or whether it's investment in solar and in wind. And so the advantage of our power purchase agreement, again, criticised by some for not being 100%, we're doing 10%, maybe 20% to start off with to make sure things work, is that can influence the market. So there's more renewable coming on stream because TfL is the biggest purchaser of energy in London. Question, can they influence the market? And the benefits won't just be felt by TfL. We can also use an economies of scale, leveraging councils, other buildings to see them getting the benefits, and they working with us can also influence the renewables market as well.
Well, I think it's just as well that London, Manchester and other mayoralties are stepping up, because we've had 12 wasted years from the government so far. Thank you very much, Mr Mayor. Thank you, Chair.
Was there a question there, Assemblymember Cooper? Okay. Can I move to the next question, please? Number 2663, in the name of Assemblymember Best, is on LGBT plus football.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for asking the question. Holding major sports events is a privilege, not a right. And I'm proud that London has had the privilege of hosting huge world-leading events in recent years, including the Men's Euros finals, the NFL, Major League Baseball, and now the biggest women's football tournament finals in the world, the Women's Euros 2022 finals. Every city or country hosting a prestigious tournament like the FIFA World Cup has been entrusted by the International Federation to deliver an event that enhances the sport's reputation and broaden its popularity and appeal. London takes this responsibility seriously, and we've made sure that our sporting events show off the best of London, including our commitment to openness, diversity and inclusion. I've been clear that I stand in solidarity with LGBTQI plus communities, and the record-breaking celebrations we hosted for 50 years of Pride earlier this month shows how valued those communities are in London. It's been fantastic to see the celebration of Pride continue at this month's UEFA Women's Euros finals. The Pride rainbow flag can be seen across this tournament. At times it's in the background of the championship logo, it's on team captains' armbands, and the fan favourite tiny football car has a rainbow livery. This celebration of Pride builds on wider work by the FA to tackle homophobia in football, including support for the Rainbow Laces campaign, which has been adopted by professional and non-league clubs across the country. but creating real change must incorporate activity beyond the big stadiums, and that's why I've been so pleased to see extensive engagement with clubs and communities around UEFA Women's Euro 2022 tournament. I went for a kickabout with some truly diverse
Mr. Mayor, I'm
grassroots...
really sorry, but I'm short on time and it's a very important question. Please, could you just answer whether you will join the collective campaign that Stonewall and the FA have already said they'd be interested in on making sure that we make sure LGBT Londoners feel welcome during the World Cup in Qatar this year?
Mr. Mayor, can you answer the question, please?
The supplementary before I answer the main one.
Pardon?
Mr. Mayor, I thought we would probably be on the equal footing and in the same place on this. It's a very simple question. I would hope you'd be in favour, and I'm only interrupting because we're very short on time, and I would hope you would agree to that today.
Okay, sorry. So I won't answer the question. So what's the new question?
It actually was the question before you, and you're not answering it. It's whether you will join a collective campaign this December. You mentioned Rainbow Laces. Rainbow Laces won't be able to take place during Qatar. This is the second consecutive World Cup in which FIFA have chosen to hold a World Cup in a place where LGBT are not welcome. Will you join that campaign? Will you join that campaign, yes or no?
You are out of time now. Hang on. I'm the chair of the Assembly here. I make a decision. Assembly Ambassador, you can write to the Mayor, and I'm sure we can answer them.
I have written, he hasn't responded. It's a yes or no question.
Okay, you're out of time now. That's the end of it, okay? Okay, can we move on to the next question, please? It's in the name of Assembly Member Desai. It's number 2447 on strip search of children, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Chair. The safeguarding of children must always be a priority for the Met Police Service. The Met Police Service has agreed that as of 1st of April this year, they'll review every more thorough, intimate part search and check every strip search of a child in custody to ensure they're carried out properly in line with policy and that children are safeguarded. I'm continuing to push the Met Police Service to publish transparent data on strip searching to allow greater public scrutiny of this area of police practice. Independent custody visitors pay particular attention to the use of force and strip searching of children and vulnerable detainees, and their findings inform our oversight of the Met Police Service. Through my action plan, officials are working with community organisations and young people to ensure that community-led scrutiny of the use of police powers is more robust and representative. It is essential that officers are held to account for their use of police powers, particularly where there is disproportionality, and I welcome that the IPC is now investigating the actions of officers in the case of Child Q under gross misconduct, as I had called for, rather than misconduct. I've asked HMIC to pay particular attention to strip searching in their next round of custody inspections to provide further assurance and scrutiny. I also welcome the Department of Education's new advice to schools and searching pupils to ensure they're aware of their responsibilities. The MPS is implementing a series of policy changes to avoid any repeat of these incidents, including increasing the level of supervision required to authorise a strip search and the completion of a safeguarding report in each case. Finally, I'm pleased that Sir Mark Rowley has been appointed as the new MPS Commissioner. Sir Mark has made clear to me that he's determined to be a reforming Commissioner.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So you already talked about this proportionality, which was going to be my first question, but I just want to put this on record. In March, for the past 3 years, we found out that 75% of the 5,279 children who were strip searched in custody were from ethnic minority backgrounds, not acceptable at all. So I was going to ask, are you confident the Met are doing enough to address this obvious and clear disproportionality on racial grounds? I think you already answered that. And how are you monitoring their work on this?
It's really important. Clearly more needs to be done here. I met recently with Lawrence Taylor. I know he came to the Police and Crime Committee as well. I think this will be one of the issues for the new Commissioner to look into for the reasons that you're aware of in relation to the concerns we have. The approach to the police must be child-centred. It's really important. And so I'm more than happy to refer your comments to the new Commissioner as well.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And my second and final question is around the online safety bill. So the dissemination of indecent images of children online is a key problem within policing at present, as the frequency with which these crimes are committed are increasing every year. How disappointed then are you, Mr. Mayor, that the online safety bill has been put on hold due to the Tory leadership campaign? Groups like the NSPCC, the Board of Deputy Bridge Jews have already expressed their concern. The NSPCC has described this legislation as crucial in stopping hate festering online.
I'm really concerned in relation to safety being compromised because of not just party political interest, but intra-party political interest and the chances of candidate A beating candidate B. I would hope the government, when there's a new leader elected on September the 4th or 5th, accelerates the progress that needs to be made in this area. And it's also really important to understand that in the meantime, the delay is leading to more people suffering.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. In order to complete the business, will the Assembly agree to suspend Standing Order 2.9b in accordance with the provisions of Standing Order 1.1h in order to allow the remaining business on the agenda to be completed? Thank you. Can we then proceed to question number 2463 in the name of Assembly Member Duval on the Shared Prosperity Fund and London?
Thank you, Chair. The signs are worrying, and it's true that London is already seeing a drop in funding levels. For example, London's allocation of the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, UK SPF, is less than half the size of the funding, the size of the EU funding it was intended to replace. In fact, the government recently published each region's share of all the various funds designed to support levelling up. Of the 11 major regional fund initiatives, including the Levelling Up Fund, the Regional Growth Fund and the UK SPF, London received by far the lowest amounts per capita, £76, compared to England average of £342. The second lowest allocation was in the South East. This government really is anti-South. It's clear from these figures that the government's focus on other regions is at London's expense, and I'm concerned that London's future funding prospects will follow this path. London has the highest child poverty rate in the country. If London's economy is to continue to grow and support levelling up in the rest of the UK, it will require investment in housing, in infrastructure, and to reduce the capital's own substantial inequalities. London has the potential to fund its own continuing growth if it's given the fiscal levers to do so. We do have some mechanisms for raising funding for public spending locally, including the Business Rate Supplement and the SIL. Building on the work of the two London Finance Commissions, the first commissioned by Boris Johnson, the second by me, I'd like to explore with government tax increment financing and other forms of fiscal devolution to enable the capital to continue to grow without having to rely on the Treasury for grant funding. The government should also devolve to us decision-making for London's fair share of schemes. We are close to our communities in Whitehall, and working with boroughs, we can make better decisions and cut out wasteful bureaucracy and delays.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Of course, we're still in a state of flux of not quite knowing where the government is going to go, or the future government is going to go on the Levelling Up white paper. The white paper itself states that it's critical that we improve productivity and boost the economic growth and encourage innovation and create jobs and enhance educational attainment, as well as renovate the social and cultural fabric of those parts of the UK that have stalled. There are parts of London that have stalled or in danger of stalling. So would a suggestion of measurable targets for levelling up on an agenda help us here in London in terms of some of the cases that we need to make?
Yes, so London as a region, thanks for your question, London as a region is the most unequal region in the country. The levels of poverty in London, if you go by ward, I'm afraid we're top of the list in relation to poverty and deprivation and so forth. That's poverty in real terms, but also in relation to the ability of people to have the potential fulfilled. And so if there's going to be metrics, it's got to be intra-region as well as inter-region, and it's got to be fair. So, yes, there should be support given to other parts of the country without a doubt, but not at London's expense. And you should look at place, yes, but also people. So communities in parts of Hackney are as deprived as communities in parts of Hull. And if you're going to level up, you should level up those families in Hackney just like you would in Hull.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Mayor, we go on to the next question, number 2488, on renters reforms, also in the name of now Assembly Member Duval.
Thank you, Chair. Renters have waited far too long for these reforms, which are crucial to better balance the rights of landlords and tenants living in the private rented sector. Renters now need to see legislation brought forward with the utmost urgency so they can live safely and securely in their homes. The White Paper contains many of the recommendations set out in the London Model for Tenancy Reform I published in 2019, including ending Section 21 evictions, introducing open-ended tenancies with no fixed-term breaks or break clauses, and reforming possession grounds so that landlords can only evict renters when they have a legitimate need to do so. I'm also pleased to see the inclusion of a property portal, the Landlord Register I've campaigned for, and which will build on the success of the Rogue Landlord and Agent Checker I published and established in London in the absence of government action. However, crucial elements are missing from the White Paper proposals if all renters, particularly those who are the most vulnerable, and households with children are to truly see the benefit of these reforms. These include extended notice periods, tenant relocation payments, and freezing rent for the next 2 years, particularly during this cost of living crisis. It's really important whoever becomes the next Conservative leader, and therefore our Prime Minister, commits to deliver on these as soon as possible.
Okay. Thank you for that answer. Some of the proposals contained in the in terms of the government's suggestions is on removing no-fault evictions and to introduce a legally binding decent home standard. But would you agree that with the Local Government Association that we need to review the London housing allowance rates, which would help the poorest in society and obviously the poorest in London if it was agreed nationally? Absolutely.
And it's worth reminding colleagues, the LGA's cross-party. So what's happened is because the local housing allowance doesn't track market rents, what you're seeing is those who are eligible for benefits only receiving a proportion of the rent the landlord charges them, which is a big problem if you can't afford to pay the difference. And that's why you're seeing Londoners living in overcrowded accommodation, right? Because they can only afford to live in property where the LHA covers their rent. Also, don't forget, the benefit cap means there's a big problem for many families who are receiving support from the government, the housing element of the universal credit. So two things need to happen. Yes, what the OGO is saying about the LHA keeping track with market rents, but secondly, the cap on benefits being removed is also important.
Okay, and would you also agree with me that given the current cost of living crisis that we're facing, would you support the government devolving the powers? You mentioned this in earlier questions, that you and other metro mayors could actually introduce rent caps, rent controls.
I appreciate London is different to Burnley, right, in relation to housing issues and so forth, and a number of other issues as well. And so what the government should do is let go. Give those in charge of the Londons, the Manchesters, Bristols, Oxford, Cambridgeshire, where there are all issues around the cost of living, particularly in relation to private rents, the power to do more in this area in relation to freezing rents, rent controls, quality of housing, and so forth. And actually, there's some good news, which is the work we did in 2019. The government's cherry-picked some of it. We're saying, go the whole 9 yards and devolve to us the powers to set rent controls if we want to. Some may decide not to, by the way, if we want to do so.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We move on to question number 2526. It's in the name of Assemblymember Sheikh on housing design standards.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for your question. Ensuring everyone in our city has a decent, safe place to call home remains a top priority for me and my team. The only way to achieve this is to continue to build the homes Londoners need. My London plan continues to provide a robust framework for sustainable and inclusive development in our city. This framework enables us to ensure we can deliver new homes in London that are designed to meet the changing and diverse needs of Londoners. The draft housing design standards the draft housing design standards local plan guidance sets out a number of standards to improve the quality of homes being built across London. This includes encouraging new development to provide more space for home working and to provide high quality communal outside space that is accessible to all residents regardless of tenure. Consultation on the draft guidance has now closed and a final version will be published later in the year. In November 2021, I also published the draft Delivering Quality Homes Handbook. This document details 50 actions that housing delivery organisations can take to achieve a good standard of quality management practices and the delivery of good quality homes. These actions can be applied to all homes of all types and tenures, ensuring we continue to address the wide-ranging needs of all Londoners.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. And although consultation has officially closed, it was a privilege to chair my first Planning and Regeneration Committee yesterday discussing exactly this. And the team at the GLA were there present, taking on the feedback of the guests that we had, which was a really kind of effective and dynamic way of doing more community outreach, as well as seeing, live the kind of manifestation of how the guidance has changed and improved. And I think that sets really best practice and high standards in London about how we continue to evolve our design standards. So one thing that I wanted to particularly hone in on and ask some more thoughts from you on is how this guidance works to encourage a more equal London through accessible and shared amenities and tackling poor doors.
Yeah, some of us sort of seen a couple of years ago, homes being opened with swimming pools only some people could use, or playgrounds in recent years which only some residents can use, and we're trying to move away from that. So we want quality that is 10-year blind. Everyone should have good quality homes. We want non-residential amenities accessible to all living in a development. We want the public realm and community spaces accessible to and available to everyone living in a development. And that's the quid pro quo if you want permission, right, to build what you want to build. And what we don't want is these sort of poor doors, segregation that has existed for too long by allowing a laissez-faire approach towards development. And I tell you this, the residents in the nicer parts of a development, they welcome it as well, because they don't want to be cut off from their community. They want to be part of the vibrant London. That's why they choose to live in vibrant London. And so we're hoping this leads to better facilities, better homes, better communities, and it's been well received.
Good, I'm really pleased to hear that. I mean, particularly post-pandemic or during the pandemic, I think the importance of our neighbours and our community was so important to people. We realised that actually your neighbour's health is your health, and having that kind of interconnectivity is a lifeline. So I think that cultural change to push back on any kind of poor doors that developers might want to put into developments is essential. And I think building on that point in terms of how the pandemic changed people's perception of their areas and their neighbourhoods, how does your guidance help maintain, particularly when it comes to building on small sites, an area to retain its local character so that as London's development continues, you can still have neighbourhoods feeling organically like they feel home?
Well, this is why this is one of the areas where we deliberately not had a command and control from the centre. Look, I don't know a particular neighbourhood in Lewisham as well as you do, or the council does, right, or another part of the city. So we're encouraging councils to make sure that they understand their communities and preserve the heritage that they know best. Of course, that's not anti-development, that's having development that's conducive to the environment. And so we've made sure that we devolve as much autonomy to communities as they can. And you'll have seen some of the local plans which recognise what the council knows about its community. In relation to, for example, where a tall building goes, it should only go in a designated place that the council said deemed appropriate for a tall building. Similarly, preserving the heritage of it could be a park or a community facility is really, really important. And so hopefully you'll see over the course of the next 2-3 years, as the London plan is now bedded in, we've got more supplementary planning guidance and additional guidance, more developments that respect the heritage of an area, but also aren't scared to develop and progress.
Well, absolutely. I mean, I think the London plan, the 2021 London plan, for me, the thing that I feel particularly proud about it is it encourages that design-led approach. And I think that gives us the capacity to continue ensuring that we design the best city in the world. So thank you very much for your thoughts this afternoon.
Thank you for that. The next question is in the name of Assemblymember Clark, number 2389, London's Anchor Institutions Network.
Thank you, Chair. The London Anchor Institutions Network brings together organisations to enable them to work collaboratively and leverage their status to support the capital's recovery from COVID-19. Since its inception, the London Fire Brigade has been an active participant. The Anchor Institutions Network is supporting 3 core recovery missions: support Londoners into good work, implement a Green New Deal, and support opportunities for young people. To help support Londoners into good jobs, the LFB has made a commitment to recruiting, retaining, promoting and upskilling Londoners from underrepresented backgrounds. It has been working to identify and engage with small, diverse organisations, and working alongside the GLA, the LFB is identifying opportunities that can be ring-fenced specifically for this market. To help deliver a Green New Deal for London, the LFB is in the process of revising its net zero strategy, which will set out how it plans to achieve decarbonisation for its estate and for its fleet, including by trialling the UK's first electric hybrid fire engine later this year. To provide support for London's young people, there are now fire cadets units in every London borough, supported through £1.1 million of funding provided by my Young Londoners Fund. Hundreds more young people are now able to develop their personal and professional skills while gaining qualifications, improving their career prospects and helping their community. The LFB is currently consulting on its Community Risk Management Plan, called Your London Fire Brigade, which details its plans to continue supporting Londoners over the coming years throughout this period of recovery from the global pandemic.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and good afternoon. And thank you for your comments earlier about the bravery of the fire brigade in this last heat wave. I was just thinking about what you've said and about the COVID-19 pandemic recovery. And one thing that really struck me last night, I was looking at the news, and they had a heat map of London. And actually, I know, because I live in an area where we were badly impacted by COVID disproportionately, and it was also disproportionately, it was hot. And it was an area where people don't have access to outdoor spaces, and it's the disadvantage that seem to continue to be disadvantaged, which is very unfortunate. I'm just wondering, in terms of the LFB maximising employment opportunities of these groups of people who are, they're frankly poor, how are they going about that?
I mean, I think what you're articulating is the structural inequalities that I often talk about in relation to our city. Unfortunately, it's the poorest Londoners who suffer the worst consequences from the heat wave we've just seen, probably from the flash flooding we may well see, and other issues, air quality, crime, and so forth. And so, what the LFB are doing as part of the recovery board is, when it comes to new recruits, and that we're now recruiting, is they're particularly going to target diverse communities. To give them credit, they've got key performance indicators to make sure they're taking on Black, Asian, multi-ethnic Londoners and other Londoners who are underrepresented in the London Fire Brigade. There's a piece of work taking place from the LFB being done by Nazir Afzal, the leading expert, in relation to the culture within the LFB. Are there things in the LFB that are deterring women or people of colour during the LFB staying once they've joined and not making the progression? Question. And so, the response from Nazir Afzal will help the LFB develop its thinking and its practices so it can be the employer of choice for all Londoners, particularly Black, Asian, minority ethnic and women Londoners.
Thank you for that. It's a really impressive charter, and quite a large range of organisations have joined. I mean, everything from Film London to Thames Water to the Metropolitan Police. I'm just wondering, overall, what is your sense of how well that's going? It's
unprecedented. I mean, there are very few silver linings from the awful pandemic. One of them has to be the greater working across London in relation to not just the councils, LFB, Met Police Service and TfL, the NHS. You mentioned some of the really good names from the private sector, voluntary and community sector, faith communities. And we've got to keep it going, even though the pandemic's behind us, in relation to recovery going forward. Every time I meet the NHS and they tell me another trust has become a living wage employer, that means people on the lowest paid getting decent pay for a hard day's work. Film London, working with Hollywood, we're creating jobs that are wow jobs for Londoners who otherwise wouldn't have access to some of the wow jobs being created. And many of these Hollywood films are made in London because of our commitment to culture and the other issues we do in our city as well. And one of the things that really frustrates me when it comes to poverty is the poverty of aspiration. And we've got to make sure every Londoner thinks that they can achieve anything. And by working with these great private sector companies, the public sector, them giving the helping hand, because not everyone's match fit to get the job, right? Giving the helping hand with the right ethos and values, I think we can get more and more Londoners who are having their potential fulfilled.
Thank you for that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that. The next question, Mr. Mayor, is 2609. It's the name of Assemblymember Barry. Yes, shifting road space away from the traffic.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for your question. 3/4 of congestion is caused by demand for road space exceeding supply, with traffic on London's roads costing the capital's economy more than £5.1 billion a year. Sustainable modes such as walking, cycling and buses can move more people while taking up significantly less space than cars. More than a third of car trips made by Londoners could be walked in under 25 minutes, and 2/3 could be cycled in under 20 minutes. By prioritising space for these modes, we can make them more attractive choices, reducing traffic and making the best use of the limited road space available. TfL and London's boroughs have achieved significant increases in active and sustainable travel since I became mayor. I tripled the amount of protected cycle space in my first term, and a further 100 kilometres plus of routes have been delivered since 2020. That's a fivefold increase since I was first elected. Upgrades to traffic signals have allowed our traffic control system to now detect 1.27 million buses every day at over 1,600 locations, meaning buses receive priority over traffic 66% of the time when they arrive at a junction. Following a trial, TfL is now making permanent the 24 hours a day, 7 days a week operation of 80 kilometres of bus lanes to encourage a greater number of bus journeys. I've also taken action to reduce the number of cars travelling into central London. Earlier this year, I made changes to the congestion charge to ensure it remained effective, and in October last year, I expanded the ULEZ to inner London, which, in addition to delivering air quality improvements, has led to fewer vehicles driving in the zone. Traffic reduction is fundamental to realising the goals of my transport strategy. TfL will achieve these through delivery of future healthy street schemes that allocate space away from traffic to vulnerable road users and public transport, supported by investment in cycle parking and cycle training to help increase modal shift. While London's population continues to grow, road space is finite. Getting more people out of cars is key to allowing the efficient movement of essential traffic, including public transport, the emergency services and people who rely on motor vehicles. It will also be critical to tackling the climate emergency. However, this goal is only achievable if TfL receives the future capital funding from government that London needs.
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor. And again, like my colleague, I'll support you over making sure that we get decent funding for Transport for London so we can invest in more of this stuff. Now, all of what you said sounded positive, but I've got some new ideas to put to you today. As I think you noted, you started this year creating, finally, a specific target to cut traffic with a goal that just over 1 in 4 journeys currently taken by cars should be made another way by 2030. And your ULEZ expansion might have reduced traffic already by 2%, according to this week's 6-month figures. Now, that's good, but it's not going to get us there on its own. And you keep telling us that smarter, fairer road charging is some way away in time. So there is more that I think reducing road space for vehicles can do to contribute to reducing traffic more quickly, both directly and by making space for walking and cycling and public transport. And after this week, I imagine most Londoners want a few more trees and space for those on our main roads as well. So my question today is, to reach your target to reduce traffic, why are you not shifting more space away from motor traffic, specifically on your red routes, in a more rapid and concerted way?
Well, you'll remember the work we've done in relation to cycle lanes on our red routes, and the opposition, notwithstanding that, we've carried on and made sure there is not just wider pavements but more cycling as well. If there are any particular red routes you want us to look into, I'm more than happy for the Walking and Cycling Commissioner or the Deputy Mayor to speak to you. But we are trying to do what we can within the bounds of recognising there are some parts of London where there are construction taking place. So a good example is, High Speed 2 in Euston, causing real challenges because they require 2 lanes, and it's causing huge problems in relation to the plans we want to do around there. So, subject to things we've got to do because of other pressures, I'm more than happy for you to meet with the relevant members of the team on individual issues that you think we could be doing more on. I don't pretend we can't go even further, even faster, so happy to have a conversation.
That's really positive. I would just add a bit more context here. I'm not simply talking about central London here. I think we should be squeezing this traffic at its source, and by that I do literally mean those huge junctions that funnel traffic from outside into our city. We need to be cutting down on the traffic on the red routes in order to make things like healthy street schemes work better, so that we're not leading to more traffic on our red routes. So I do want to see you squeezing down on the road space, and I do not see that currently in your strategy. At the moment, you talk about traffic reduction giving the opportunity for road space reallocation in your cycling action plan, for example, and I think it ought to be a bit more the other way round. If you're up for talking about that a bit further, that is something I think is currently missing in a sort of philosophical sense from your transport strategy.
Let me know, for the audience now, I'm not in favour of more congestion. And so we've always got to be aware of the law of unintended consequences.
We are. We had, for example, an M4 bus lane for a while, and that was got rid of, and I don't think that was for a good reason. The M4 bus lane was very good for a little while there.
Even you can't blame me for the M4 bus lane.
That was nothing to do with you. That was well before your time. I'm out of time.
I'm waiting for that not to blame me.
But I think we're missing a trick not taking away road space on the main roads, and I think it would really genuinely help in damping down traffic overall. And if you're up for talking about it more, then I will do that. And that is the end of my questions.
Thank you, Assembly Berry. The next question is 2542 in the name of Assemblymember Plensky on climate justice for Londoners.
Thank you, Chair. Climate change is affecting all Londoners. We're right now seeing the effects of extreme heat across the city. I've been clear that the climate crisis is also a social justice issue. Londoners with low incomes and black and Asian and minority ethnic Londoners are likely to be disproportionately impacted by poor air quality, as well as flooding and overheating caused by climate change. I was the first major city leader to declare a climate emergency, and I was re-elected on a manifesto that prioritised tackling inequalities and the climate and ecological crisis. Working to build a greener, fairer future for all Londoners is one of my top priorities. Aside from my major electoral mandate, every step we take is based on consultation with Londoners. We're currently consulting on the proposed ULEZ expansion to Outer London, and Londoners can always have their say on climate issues through Talk London, City Hall's online community, which so far this year has held surveys to inform my policies on ULEZ and rewilding. But we must all work together to tackle this crisis. London's boroughs have a crucial role to play on the front line of local community engagement. The majority of councils have now declared a climate emergency, and many have sought residents' input to develop climate action plans, including via citizens' assemblies. I'm delivering several programmes that address climate justice, supporting the most marginalised and climate-impacted communities, while placing local residents' voices front and centre. Last year, I published a climate risk map for London to identify the neighbourhoods most exposed to climate impacts with high concentrations of vulnerable populations. Based on this evidence, I'm now engaging communities in design and action. Programmes like Grow Together, in partnership with Hubbub, Clever Cities, with Peabody Housing and Groundwork, and Future Neighbourhood 2030, all involve the GLA working with partners and local residents in some of London's most deprived communities, providing funding and support for them to develop community-led strategies to tackle environmental and social injustices. My Green Space grants targets areas of deprivation and climate risk, simultaneously reducing inequalities in green space access and flood risk. And my air quality policies have helped reduce the pollution exposure gap between the most and least deprived areas of London by up to 50%.
Thank you very much. As you know, I'm always appreciative of the way that you say we should work together, and I appreciate the cross-party working on this. So I want to put that out there straight away, as always. I do think a lot of these solutions are top-down. Now, I think there is a space for established leadership on climate justice, but I think we might be missing a trick in terms of how many community groups there are doing work on climate justice. Now, this isn't a criticism, because I know that you do a lot of meeting people and also a lot of consultation. The question is slightly different. I want to know about sharing power, where people can have genuine influence over your policies and City Hall policies. Can you give me any specific examples of where you've worked with a community group who are doing existing work on climate justice and shared your power?
I'll give it a few. Future Neighbourhoods 2030 involved communities in Camden and North Ken. The work that Peabody is doing is with communities on Peabody housing. The work we're doing as a consequence of the climate risk map is working with communities for them to help us design the solutions to the areas being more deprived. Other programmes I said in my answer are Talk London, ideas from the community about what work we can be doing. Another example is in relation to work we're doing in Camden, Croydon, Hackney, Kingston, Lambeth and Newham with the citizens' climate assemblies they have there. And Waltham Forest, by the way, we're doing great work with Waltham Forest, who have a climate commission. So we're doing lots of work with Londoners, more so than any other mayor in the history of our city, and we'll carry on doing more work with Londoners in relation to addressing this challenge, which is a crisis that affects all of us.
It's good to see progress here, and I also appreciate the fact that you've emphasised diversity there, both with women and black, Asian and minority ethnic voices. Almost all of these groups that you're talking about, I notice people are unpaid, particularly where we have commissioners. And I think it's vital that people are given compensation for their time and Labour, because that's vital to be able to do effective and sustained social justice and climate justice issues. Now, we do have a solution here. We've got the London Housing Panel. This, as you know, is a group of community and voluntary organisations that come together where they have been recompensed for their time and labour, and I think that's right. So the question really is this: would you do the same thing around bringing together a coalition of community and voluntary organisations who are paid and that it's grassroots, genuinely community-based, and set up a London climate panel?
So just to be clear, paid for by who?
Paid for by City Hall.
Right. No, I mean, I can't commit to even more expenditure in this area than we've already expended. I'm already criticised by some people for the money I'm spending on climate change. I'm criticised for wanting to improve the quality of air in outer London by investing in cameras.
I think we're talking about a tiny amount of money. So if we look at the London Housing Panel, for instance, I think it's between £30,000 to £40,000. Now, relatively on climate justice, considering how urgent this is and how much people are affected by different and unequal vulnerabilities, isn't that money worth paying?
I'm happy to give you a list of all the money we're invested in climate justice. In answer to the previous question, I talked about £90 million
yeah.
for a green bond. I've also talked about other money we've invested
Which is brilliant, but it's top down. So how about putting some of that money to genuinely grassroots community? That's real leadership, isn't it?
Well, I've given an example of some of the work we're doing with communities. If the Green Party want to put forward a budget amendment, I'm more than happy to look into the budget amendment in relation to this. What I can't do is at this stage to expend more money in this area than we already have for obvious reasons that I've set up. But I'm more than happy to do more engagement with communities. You'll be aware that progress is made in relation to housing, in relation to homes for Londoners. There are other areas of work we're working with the Recovery Board. Some councils are involved in their communities, some of that's paid, some of that's not paid. More than happy to work with council and other partners. Peabody, of course, work with their residents. But I don't want to.
I do think everyone should always be paid if they're giving their time and labour to make London better. Would you not agree with that?
Listen, I work closely with coaches who coach children boxing and football and cricket and scouts and cubs and swimming. Even the Green Party, who are unpaid volunteers because they're good citizens. Don't knock good citizenship. Okay. One of the reasons we're a great city is because citizens.
But it's unsustainable unless we make sure those people are recompensed. Thank you very much, Chair.
Okay. I've got an indication from Assemblymember Cooper that she wants to come in as supplementary to this.
Thank you very much. It's just on the issue about supporting campaign groups in London, and I feel that we ran out of time when Assemblymember Best was raising a really important issue earlier on. I've had another look at her original question, and it just says, how can we work together? It doesn't mention a specific group. And I just wondered if we could, perhaps Assemblymember Best and I could be in contact with your staff so that we could give some consideration as to whether or not that is a campaign that we could consider.
Sure. Of course we can work together. But if it's so important, why not ask it as a first question rather than 50 minutes down the road when you run out of time?
It did make it very difficult, and just as Assemblymember Plenary has just introduced something that I know nothing about that might have been something we all supported in the budget.
I'm more than happy to work with you and anybody from any party on this issue, but if that's the case, don't waste time on knockabout stuff. Treat it as a priority it deserves, rather than wasting time on nonsense.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. But
I think now
that's
you
a
mentioned
positive response. Thank
now
you.
that you've mentioned Assemblymember Best, Assemblymember Best has a right to.
She does.
Has a point of order.
Thank you. I welcome the mention of my name, Assemblymember Cooper. So thank you. The question did specifically mention the World Cup in Qatar, and that's something that the Mayor didn't get to in his answer. So just to put on record that there was a specific ask in how we could work on that issue as we go towards the World Cup. And the Mayor knows that because he's received a letter from me on the issue, so he knows exactly what I'm talking about. A campaign that the FA, Stonewall, happy to pick up. I think we can work together. I would have appreciated a yes today from the Mayor.
Look, I think that we've dealt with this thing, the issue, right? Okay, and I keep reminding the Assembly members, ask your question in a way which are effective, and I think we'll leave it there now. Mr. Mayor, thank you very much for the answers you've given us, and we note them. Thank you. Okay. Can I ask the Assembly to agree the motion which is set out in the agenda in my name, which is that the Assembly notes the answers to the questions asked? Okay. Next is the matter about the proposed delegation of authority. This report asks the Assembly to agree and urges delegation from the close of this meeting to the next meeting of the Assembly of the 8th of September. Further to the report, and in light of the indications from the party groups, the proposed delegation is to the Chair of the GLA Oversight Committee in consultation with the party group leaders, the relevant committee chairs and myself. Do the members agree with that recommendation? Okay, the next scheduled meeting of the London Assembly will be the plenary meeting, which will take place at 10 a.m. on Thursday, the 8th of September 2022 in the chamber of the City Hall. There is no urgent business requiring consideration. Can I please remind the members that there is a head over to the living room where there's all Assembly members photo opportunity. And can I all wish you a very happy summer recess and have a safe time. Thank you very much.